Mike Foster froze mid-stride, coffee thermos slipping from his fingers and shattering against the dirt road. What he witnessed wasn't supposed to exist in Texas. A massive python, thick as a fence post, crushing the life from one of the most powerful Brahman bulls he'd ever seen. "Oh my God," whispered Ranger Daniels behind him, her hand flying to her mouth as her radio clattered to the ground. Eleanor, who had followed their truck in her ancient pickup, let out a strangled cry, her weathered hand clutching the cross around her neck, the same one she'd worn every day since her son had abandoned the ranch. "Get the tranq gun," Mike ordered, his voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. "And call Dr. Morgan now!" Could they save this magnificent creature in time? And why did the bull's eyes, locked with Mike's own, seem to hold not just fear, but a desperate plea for something beyond himself? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The South Texas Conservation Area sprawled across 15,000 acres of rolling grasslands and scattered mesquite trees. Once part of the vast Wilson family ranch, the land had been donated to the state after a devastating drought had forced bankruptcy 5 years earlier. What remained was a sanctuary for native wildlife and, occasionally, abandoned livestock from surrounding failed farms. Thunder wasn't just any abandoned animal. Standing nearly 6 feet tall at the shoulder, the massive Brahman bull had once been the pride of the Wilson Ranch. His impressive muscular frame and distinctive white coat with gray patches had won ribbons at county fairs across 3 states. The gentle giant had been worth more than some of the ranch hands' annual salaries until the day the bank foreclosed and Charles Wilson simply walked away, leaving Thunder and the other animals to fend for themselves. Charles's mother kept to herself, her silence about her son's abandonment of the family legacy speaking volumes about her shame. She volunteered at the rescue center daily, her quiet competence and endless knowledge of animal husbandry earning her respect from rangers half her age. Dr. Sarah Morgan's arrival at the rescue center 2 years ago had raised eyebrows. Why would a veterinarian with her credentials choose a struggling facility in the middle of nowhere? Few knew about the bitter divorce, the custody battle lost because the judge deemed her too devoted to her work, the daughter she now saw only on alternating weekends. Sarah found solace in healing animals when her own heart remained broken. James Wilson, Eleanor's nephew and Mike's cousin, had worked at the ranch until Charles fired him for what he called excessive discipline of the livestock. The python's coils tightened with each of Thunder's labored breaths. The massive Brahman bull's eyes bulged as he struggled weakly, his once powerful legs now trembling beneath him. Mike Foster approached cautiously, tranquilizer gun steady in his hands, his gaze never leaving the snake's triangular head. "Easy now," he whispered, though whether to himself or the animals he couldn't say. "Just hold on, big guy." The python was an anomaly in these parts, a Burmese python, at least 18 feet long and thick as a fence post. It had no business being in South Texas, but Mike had heard the reports from Florida about released pets establishing wild populations. This one had likely escaped or been released from someone's private collection, growing to monstrous proportions on the abundant wildlife in the conservation area. 20 yards away, Storm paced nervously, her white coat catching the morning sunlight. She'd been the one to alert them with her distressed bellowing, leading Mike's patrol vehicle directly to this clearing where Thunder lay trapped. Now she watched, muscles tensed, as if calculating her next move. "Mike, we need to act fast," Ranger Daniels said, her voice low and urgent. "That snake's crushing his rib cage. Few more minutes and he won't make it." Eleanor Wilson stood by their vehicle, her thin frame seeming to shrink further with each passing second. "That's Charles's prize bull," she said, her voice barely audible. "Thunder. Been with Storm since they were calves. Never seen one without the other." Mike nodded, mind racing through options. The tranquilizer would work on the python, but not quickly enough. They needed a distraction, something to loosen its grip just enough to give Thunder a fighting chance. "Call Dr. Morgan," Mike instructed Daniels. "Tell her to meet us at the center. And get that snake hook from the truck." His words were cut short by a thunderous bellow. Storm had apparently reached her limit of patience. The Brahmin cow charged forward with surprising speed, head lowered, her sharp horns aimed directly at the python's midsection. "Get back!" Mike shouted, but it was too late. Storm slammed into the python with the force of a freight train, her horns catching under one of its coils. The snake's head whipped around, fangs bared, but Storm was already backing up for another charge. The momentary loosening of its grip allowed Thunder to draw a desperate breath, his massive chest expanding painfully. Mike didn't hesitate. He fired the tranquilizer, the dart embedding itself in the python's thick muscles. Then he grabbed the snake hook and ran forward, using it to pull one of the coils away from Thunder's body while Daniels approached from the other side with a catch pole. What happened next would become Ranger legend. As they struggled with the increasingly drowsy python, Storm charged again, this time catching the snake squarely and tossing it partially off Thunder's back. The bull, sensing his chance, gathered his remaining strength and rolled to his side, dislodging more of the constrictor's massive body. "He's fighting back!" Eleanor called from the sidelines, her worn hands clasped together as if in prayer. The python, now affected by the tranquilizer and facing unexpected resistance, began to lose its advantage. Mike and Daniels worked frantically to unwind its remaining coils from Thunder's body, careful to avoid its still dangerous head. Thunder lay on his side, breathing heavily, his eyes rolling wildly. The damage was evident: deep bruising across his rib cage, possible internal injuries, and a nasty gash where the python's scales had scraped against his hide. But he was alive. Storm approached cautiously, nudging Thunder's massive head with her muzzle. The bull's eyes focused on her, recognition evident even through his pain. He attempted to rise but fell back, too weak to stand. "We need to get him to the center," Mike said, reaching for his radio. "He needs medical attention right away." Eleanor stepped forward, her thin frame suddenly commanding. "You'll need the livestock trailer," she said, authority returning to her voice. "And don't you dare separate them. That cow won't leave his side now, and forcing her will just cause more harm." Mike looked at Storm, who had positioned herself protectively next to Thunder, her body pressed against his as if lending him strength. He'd worked with animals for years, but had never seen anything quite like this. The conscious choice to protect, to stay, to comfort. Dr. Sarah Morgan arrived as they were loading Thunder onto the trailer, her truck kicking up dust as she braked hard on the dirt road. She jumped out, medical bag in hand, her sharp eyes immediately assessing the situation. "A python attack?" she asked, already pulling on gloves. "Never seen that here before." "First time for everything," Mike replied, helping guide the ramp beneath Thunder's considerable weight. "The cow won't leave him. They're bonded somehow." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Brahmin cattle are highly intelligent and social. They form strong attachments. She approached Thunder carefully, checking his vital signs while Storm watched her every move. "He's in shock, several broken ribs, possible internal bleeding. We need to move now." Loading 2 full-grown Brahmin cattle into a single trailer would normally be a risky proposition, but Storm remained calm, standing protectively near Thunder's head as they secured him for transport. When Mike tried to separate them for safety, Storm let out a low, mournful sound that made everyone pause. "Let her ride with him," Eleanor insisted. "She'll keep him calm." "Might make the difference in whether he makes it back alive." Mike hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but you'll need to ride in the trailer too, Eleanor. Keep them both calm." The elderly woman didn't hesitate, climbing aboard with surprising agility. "Known these two since they were born," she said quietly. "Least I can do." As they drove toward the rescue center, Mike kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Through the trailer's grates, he could see Eleanor sitting on a small stool, one hand resting on Thunder's massive shoulder, the other gently stroking Storm's face. The cow had positioned herself so that Thunder could see her, her body language radiating a protective calm that seemed to transcend mere animal instinct. "Never seen anything like it," Daniels murmured from the passenger seat. "Way she came charging in like that. Could have been killed herself." Mike nodded, remembering the fierce determination in Storm's eyes as she'd attacked a predator many times more dangerous than herself. "Makes you wonder what we don't know about what goes on in their heads," he said, "about what they feel." In the back seat, Sarah was already on the phone with her assistant, ordering supplies in preparation for Thunder's arrival. "Set up the large treatment area," she instructed. "We'll need the portable ultrasound, IV fluids, broad-spectrum antibiotics, and prepare the adjacent pen. We have 2 patients, not 1. As they pulled into the rescue center, volunteers were already waiting. The aging facility had once been the Wilson Ranch's main barn, converted now to house injured wildlife and abandoned livestock. Its weathered wood and rusting metal roof belied the state-of-the-art medical equipment inside, much of it donated by Sarah when she'd arrived. "Easy now," Mike called as they began to unload Thunder. Slow and steady. The bull was conscious but weak, his breathing labored. Storm refused to leave the trailer until Thunder had been safely lowered to the ground. Then she jumped down and positioned herself at his head, walking alongside as they guided him toward the treatment area. Eleanor watched with tears in her eyes. "My son should see this," she whispered to Mike. "Maybe then he'd understand what he threw away." Inside the treatment area, Sarah worked efficiently, hooking Thunder up to monitors, starting IV fluids, examining his injuries. 3 broken ribs, contusions everywhere, but the internal organs seem intact, she reported. "He's a fighter." Throughout the examination, Storm remained nearby, watching intently. When Thunder groaned in pain as Sarah probed a particularly sensitive area, Storm moved forward, nudging Sarah's arm gently but firmly away. "She's protecting him," Sarah said, amazed. "I've never seen this level of awareness in cattle before." Mike leaned against the wall, watching. "What are his chances?" Sarah straightened, removing her stethoscope. "Good. Actually, he's young, strong, and remarkably, the python didn't manage to do any critical damage. The next 24 hours will tell, but I think he'll pull through." She glanced at Storm. "Especially with his own personal nurse keeping watch." As night fell, the rescue center grew quiet. Most of the volunteers had gone home, leaving only Mike, Sarah, and Eleanor to take shifts, monitoring Thunder's condition. Storm had refused food and water, standing vigil beside the injured bull's makeshift bed of straw. "You should go home and rest," Mike told Eleanor around midnight. "We've got this covered." The elderly woman shook her head, her eyes never leaving the 2 animals. "No," she said simply. "I need to be here." For both of them. In the dim light of the treatment area, Mike saw something in Eleanor's expression he'd never noticed before. A deep, abiding guilt that seemed to reach beyond simple concern for these animals. "They were special to you," he observed quietly, "before the ranch closed." Eleanor nodded, her weathered hands twisting in her lap. "Thunder was born during the worst storm I'd ever seen," she said, her voice soft with memory. "Charles was away at a cattle auction. I delivered him myself, right in the middle of that downpour. When Storm came along 2 days later, it seemed like fate they'd be together." She fell silent, watching as Storm gently nudged Thunder's massive head, urging him to drink from the water bucket Sarah had positioned within reach. "My son never understood what he had here," she finally continued. "Not the land, not the animals, not the responsibility. When things got hard, he just left." Her voice hardened. "Left everything behind like it meant nothing. These 2 were the heart of our breeding program, worth thousands. But more than that, they were family." Mike was about to respond when Thunder suddenly stirred, attempting to rise. Sarah rushed forward, but Storm was faster, positioning herself against the bull's side, offering support as he struggled to his feet. For a tense moment it seemed he might fall, but with Storm's steadying presence he managed to stand, swaying slightly. "Well, I'll be," Sarah whispered. "He shouldn't be able to do that yet." Eleanor smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Some bonds give strength even medicine can't provide," she said. "Those two have always been that way. One falls, the other lifts." As the night deepened, Thunder remained standing, Storm pressed against his side like a living crutch. Mike watched them from across the room, thinking about Eleanor's words, about bonds that transcend understanding, about strength that comes from somewhere beyond the physical. In the quiet of the treatment area, with moonlight streaming through the high windows, he witnessed something that defied simple explanation. A connection between two beings that spoke of something deeper than instinct, something that looked remarkably like love. Dawn broke over the rescue center, painting the weathered barn in soft gold. Thunder had survived the night, a miracle according to Dr. Sarah Morgan, who had finally fallen asleep in a chair beside the treatment area. The massive bull was still standing, though leaning heavily against Storm, who hadn't moved an inch since he'd risen to his feet. Mike entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Eleanor, who had refused to leave and was sitting on a hay bale, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "How's our patient?" he asked, softly. Eleanor's weathered face creased into a smile. "Stubborn as ever. Won't lie down even though he should. Just like his father, too proud for his own good." Mike approached the pair slowly. Thunder's breathing was still labored, each intake causing a visible wince, but his eyes were clear and alert. The bull watched Mike's approach without fear, a remarkable response considering the trauma he'd experienced. "I've been thinking about that python," Mike said, leaning against the stall door. "It's not native. Someone had to have brought it here and either lost it or dumped it when it got too big to handle," Eleanor finished, taking a sip of coffee. "Wouldn't be the first time. People get these exotic pets without thinking it through, then the animals pay the price." A soft groan from Thunder drew their attention. The bull had shifted his weight, causing pain to flare across his injured side. Storm immediately adjusted her position, pressing more firmly against him to provide support. The tenderness in the gesture struck Mike deeply. "You know," he said quietly, "my mother used to tell me animals understand more than we give them credit for. I always thought she was just being sentimental." Eleanor nodded. "Your mother was a wise woman. I remember how she used to bring you to the ranch when you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Always had you helping with the calves." The memory caught Mike by surprise. "You remember that?" "Of course I do. Mary Foster never met an animal she didn't love, and she made sure you learned the same." Eleanor's gaze drifted back to Thunder and Storm. "She'd have understood what we're seeing here without having to question it." A noise at the door interrupted their conversation. Dr. Morgan had awakened and was reviewing Thunder's vital signs with quiet efficiency. "His stats are better than I expected," she reported, genuine surprise in her voice. "Still critical, but heading in the right direction." She glanced at Storm. "Has she moved at all? Eaten anything?" Mike shook his head. "Not that I've seen." Sarah frowned. "She needs to eat, or we'll have 2 patients instead of 1. She reached for a bucket of feed, approaching Storm carefully. The cow watched her come but made no move toward the food when Sarah placed it nearby. "She won't leave him," Eleanor said simply. "Not even to eat." Sarah ran a hand through her disheveled hair, frustration evident. "Animals don't sacrifice their own well-being like this. It's not natural." "Maybe what's natural isn't always what we think it is," Mike suggested quietly. Before Sarah could respond, the center's door swung open, and Ranger Daniels entered, accompanied by a local news reporter and cameraman. "I tried to stop them," Daniels apologized, But the story's already out. Apparently, someone posted about the python attack on social media. The reporter, a young woman with bright eyes and a determined expression, stepped forward. Melissa Chen, KSAT News. We received reports of a Brahmin bull being attacked by a python and another bull saving it. Our viewers would love to hear this story. Mike moved to intercept them, keeping his body between the camera and the animals. This is a medical facility, not a tourist attraction. These animals have been through trauma and need quiet to recover. The reporter wasn't easily deterred. The public has a right to know about exotic predators in the area, and the human interest angle of one animal saving another. They're not just animals, Eleanor interrupted, her voice surprisingly strong as she rose from the hay bale. They have names, they have history. They were born on my family's ranch, and they deserve respect, not to be turned into entertainment. The reporter hesitated, seemingly struck by the elderly woman's intensity. Her cameraman, however, had already begun filming around Mike, capturing footage of thunder and storm. "Look at that," he murmured. "The white one's holding the other one up." The comment drew everyone's attention back to the cattle. Indeed, Thunder had begun to sag, his strength waning after the long night. Storm had shifted her position, bracing her body more firmly against his, her head pressed supportively under his massive neck. Even the reporter fell silent, watching the tableau with growing wonder. "Turn that camera off," Sarah said quietly but firmly. "What you're seeing is private, sacred even." To everyone's surprise, the cameraman lowered his equipment without argument, his expression solemn. "My grandparents had a dairy farm when I was a kid," he said softly. "Never saw anything like this, though." Melissa Chen seemed to reassess the situation, her professional demeanor softening. "What are their names?" she asked, no longer pushing for a story, but genuinely curious. "Thunder and Storm," Eleanor replied. "They've been together since birth." The reporter nodded slowly. "Maybe there's a different angle here, not sensationalism, but something about connection. Would you be willing to tell me their story?" "On your terms?" Mike exchanged glances with Eleanor and Sarah. The rescue center was perpetually underfunded, constantly at risk of closure. Positive publicity could make a difference. "If you're respectful, and if it doesn't disturb their recovery," Mike finally agreed, "and we approve any footage before it airs." Melissa nodded. "Agreed. We can come back when they're more stable." After the news crew departed, promising to return in a few days, the treatment area fell quiet again. Sarah resumed her examination of Thunder, her movements gentle and methodical. "The bruising is extensive," she reported, "but the ultrasound shows no major organ damage. It's the ribs I'm worried about. If one punctures a lung—" She didn't need to finish the thought. All of them understood the precarious nature of Thunder's condition. As midday approached, the temperature in the barn rose despite the fans working overtime. Thunder began to show signs of distress, his breathing becoming more labored in the heat. "We need to cool him down," Sarah decided, filling buckets with cold water. "His body temperature is rising, and with those injured ribs he can't regulate properly." Mike and Eleanor helped apply cool compresses to Thunder's massive body, careful to avoid putting pressure on his injuries. Throughout the process, Storm watched vigilantly, only moving when necessary to allow them access, always returning to her supportive position. "She's understanding what we're doing," Sarah observed with quiet amazement. "Moving only enough to let us help, then returning to exactly where she's needed most." Eleanor nodded. These two were always special, different. Even Charles noticed it, though he only saw it in terms of what they could produce together. A comfortable silence fell as they worked, broken only by Thunder's occasional pained grunts and the gentle murmuring of encouragement from Eleanor. The bond between the elderly woman and the animals was evident, a history written in small gestures and shared understanding. By late afternoon, Thunder's temperature had stabilized, but a new concern arose. The power flickered once, twice, then cut out completely, plunging the center into relative darkness as the backup generator struggled to engage. "Damn summer brownouts," Sarah muttered, reaching for her phone's flashlight. "The generator should kick in any second." But the seconds stretched into a full minute with no response from the aging generator. The treatment area, designed to be cool and calming, quickly began to feel stifling as the ventilation system failed. Thunder shifted nervously, the sudden darkness and silence clearly unsettling him. His movement caused a sharp pain, and he let out a distressed bellow that echoed through the building. Storm's reaction was immediate and startling. She moved to position herself between Thunder and the perceived threat of the darkness, her posture alert and protective. A low, warning sound emerged from her throat, not quite a bellow, something more complex, almost communicative. "She thinks he's in danger," Eleanor whispered. "She's trying to protect him from whatever caused the lights to go out." The standby lights finally flickered on, casting the area in a dim red glow as the generator rumbled to life. The emergency power would keep the essential medical equipment running, but the air conditioning remained offline. Thunder was clearly agitated now, attempting to move despite his injuries, eyes wide with fear. Each movement sent waves of pain through his battered body, creating a dangerous cycle of panic and hurt. "We need to sedate him," Sarah decided, reaching for her medical kit. "He'll injure himself further if we don't." As she prepared the injection, Storm did something remarkable. She moved to face Thunder directly, positioning herself so their eyes met. Then she let out a series of soft, almost melodic sounds, so unlike the typical vocalizations of cattle that everyone in the room stared in surprise. Thunder's response was immediate. His breathing slowed, his desperate movements ceased, and his focus centered entirely on Storm. It was as if they were communicating in a language known only to them. "I've never seen anything like this," Sarah whispered, the prepared syringe forgotten in her hand. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Love," she said simply. "That's what you're seeing. Pure and simple." Mike found himself remembering his mother's words from long ago. "Animals know things we've forgotten, Mike. They remember how to speak without words, how to love without conditions." The power returned fully an hour later, but the incident had left its mark on everyone who witnessed it. Sarah, who had arrived at the rescue center as a strict scientist, found herself reconsidering long-held beliefs about animal cognition and emotion. Mike, who had always respected animals but maintained professional distance, felt a shift in his understanding of the creatures under his protection. As evening approached, Thunder finally consented to lie down, a sign that his pain had lessened enough to allow rest. Storm positioned herself beside him, her body close enough for contact, but careful not to press against his injuries. "They should both rest now," Sarah advised, packing away her equipment. "I'll stay the night again, just to be safe." Eleanor nodded, her exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. "I'll bring you some dinner from my place. You need to keep up your strength, too." As the two women left to arrange food and supplies for the night ahead, Mike remained in the treatment area, watching the cattle settle into their first real rest since the attack. The intimacy between them was palpable, a silent communication that transcended simple companionship. His radio crackled, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Daniel's, her voice tense. "Mike, we found something you should see. About that python. It didn't just wander into the conservation area. It had marks on it. Signs of captivity. Someone brought it here deliberately." A chill ran down Mike's spine despite the lingering heat. "You think someone released it intentionally? In cattle country?" "Worse," Daniels replied. "It had fresh scarring. Someone was transporting it, probably illegally. This wasn't a pet release, this was wildlife trafficking gone wrong." Mike glanced at Thunder and Storm, now resting peacefully after their ordeal. The thought that their suffering might have been the result of deliberate human action filled him with a quiet rage. "Keep this quiet for now," he instructed Daniels. "I don't want it getting back to the press until we know more." As he signed off, Mike noticed Eleanor standing in the doorway, her expression making it clear she'd overheard the conversation. "It's starting again, isn't it?" she asked softly. "The smuggling, the trafficking, just like before." Mike frowned. "Before?" Eleanor's eyes took on a distant look. "Why do you think my son really lost the ranch, Mike? It wasn't just the drought. He got involved with the wrong people, people who used the remote pastures for moving things they shouldn't. When he tried to back out—" She shook her head. "Some debts can't be repaid with money." The revelation hung in the air between them, adding a new dimension to the story Mike thought he knew. Before he could press for details, thunder stirred in his sleep, and Storm immediately raised her head, alert to his needs even in rest. Eleanor smiled sadly. At least those two found each other in all this mess. Some bonds can't be broken, no matter what forces try to tear them apart. As night settled over the rescue center, Mike found himself standing guard, not just over two injured animals, but over a mystery that seemed to grow deeper with each passing hour. Whatever had brought that python to the conservation area, whatever had led to Thunder's near-death experience, was part of something larger, something that had already claimed one family's legacy and now threatened to bring new danger to the land he'd sworn to protect. 3 days after the python attack, Thunder showed remarkable improvement. His breathing had eased. The deep bruising across his ribs had begun to fade from angry purple to yellowish green, and his appetite had returned, a promising sign that Dr. Sarah Morgan noted in her medical log with cautious optimism. "His recovery is faster than I would have predicted," she told Mike as they observed the pair from the doorway of the treatment area. "Medically speaking, he should still be in critical condition." Mike watched as Storm gently nudged a pile of fresh hay closer to Thunder, a behavior they'd witnessed repeatedly over the past days. "Maybe medicine doesn't account for everything that goes into healing," he suggested. Sarah's expression softened, a notable change from the clinical detachment she'd maintained when first arriving at the center. "A month ago, I would have dismissed that as sentimentality," she admitted. "Now, I'm not so sure." The rescue center had become something of a local attraction since the KSAT news segment had aired the previous evening. Melissa Chen had kept her word, presenting a thoughtful piece about Thunder and Storm's remarkable bond rather than sensationalizing the python attack. The segment ended with information about the center's financial struggles and an appeal for donations. By morning, the center's rarely used phone had been ringing non-stop. Local ranchers offered supplies, feed companies promised free deliveries, and individual donors pledged money. Eleanor had been fielding calls all day, her voice growing stronger with each conversation, as if the sudden interest in her beloved animals had rejuvenated her. "We've received enough pledges to keep operating for at least 6 months, she announced, joining Mike and Sarah by the treatment area. "And the Cattlemen's Association wants to feature Thunder and Storm in their conservation awareness program." Mike smiled at the elderly woman's obvious delight, but couldn't shake his concern about Daniel's discovery regarding the python. He hadn't shared Eleanor's revelation about her son's involvement with smugglers, unsure how much weight to give her words. Charles Wilson's failures as a rancher were well documented. His potential criminal connections were not. "That's great news, Eleanor," he said sincerely. "These two deserve all the support they can get." A commotion at the center's main entrance interrupted their conversation. Ranger Daniels appeared, her expression tight with barely contained anger. Behind her stood a man Mike recognized immediately, James Wilson, Eleanor's nephew and Mike's estranged cousin. James looked much as he had the last time Mike had seen him 5 years earlier, tall and rangy with the Wilson family's characteristic sharp blue eyes, though now his face bore new lines of hardship. He removed his dusty cowboy hat as he approached, revealing hair more gray than brown. "Aunt Eleanor," he nodded respectfully before acknowledging the others. "Mike, Doctor." Eleanor's joy evaporated instantly. "James, what brings you here after all this time?" James shifted uncomfortably, his gaze drifting to thunder and storm. "Saw the news. Thought I should check on them. They were mine to care for once, after all." "Before your cousin fired you for beating them," Daniels interjected sharply. James's jaw tightened. "That wasn't how it happened." "Wasn't it?" Mike challenged, old anger surfacing. "I saw the marks on that young heifer myself. Charles might have been a poor businessman, but he was right to let you go." A tense silence fell. Inside the treatment area, Thunder raised his head, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Storm moved closer to him, protective as always. "I didn't come here to dig up old grievances," James finally said. "I came because—" He hesitated, then continued with evident difficulty. "Because I think I know where that python came from." Mike's full attention snapped to his cousin. "Go on." James glanced at the others, then back to Mike. "Not here, in private." Eleanor stepped forward, her frail frame vibrating with unexpected intensity. "Anything you have to say about those animals, you can say in front of me. I've earned that right." For a moment it seemed James might refuse, but something in his aunt's unwavering gaze made him relent. "There's a new operation moving exotic animals through the county," he said quietly. "High-end stuff for collectors who don't care about legalities. Snakes, rare birds, big cats. They're using the old cattle routes just like in Charles's day." "And how exactly would you know about this?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. James's eyes flicked to her, then away. "Because they approached me about using my land, said they knew I was struggling, offered good money." His voice hardened. "I said no." Mike studied his cousin, searching for deception. James had always been a complicated man, proud, sometimes harsh, but rarely dishonest. "You think the python escaped during transport?" James nodded. "Or was released when it became too difficult to handle. Either way, it's part of something bigger, something dangerous." Eleanor sank onto a nearby chair, her face pale. "Just like before," she murmured. "It's happening all over again." Sarah looked confused. "What's happening again? What are you all talking about?" Mike and James exchanged glances, a moment of unexpected solidarity in their shared family history. "My uncle, Charles Wilson, got involved with wildlife smugglers," Mike explained. "Used the ranch as a waypoint. When the drought hit and he couldn't pay his debts to them, they made sure he lost everything," Eleanor finished, her voice hollow. "The bank foreclosure was real enough, but it wouldn't have happened if those people hadn't called in their markers when Charles tried to back out." Sarah looked stunned. "And these same people are back?" "Not the same ones," James clarified, "but the same type. There's always a market for exotic animals, and South Texas is ideal territory. Remote, close to the border, plenty of private land where authorities rarely venture." Thunder let out a low bellow, drawing their attention back to the treatment area. The massive bull had managed to stand up on his own for the first time since the attack, though Storm remained close, ready to support him if needed. "He's getting stronger," Sarah observed, professional interest momentarily overriding the tension of James's revelation. Eleanor rose shakily, moving to the stall door. "Always was a fighter, this one, even as a calf." James approached cautiously, stopping a respectful distance from the animals. Something complicated passed across his features as he observed Thunder and Storm. Regret, perhaps, or a softer emotion rarely associated with the hard-edged rancher. "I never hurt them, you know," he said quietly, addressing no one in particular. "Not the way Charles claimed. I was strict, maybe too strict by some standards, but I respected them. His voice dropped even lower. These two, especially. Eleanor turned to her nephew, years of unspoken hurt evident in her weathered face. Then why didn't you fight harder to save them when everything fell apart? Why did you just walk away like Charles did? The question hung in the air, heavy with accusation. James's shoulders slumped slightly, the bravado draining from him. Because I couldn't afford to feed them, Aunt Eleanor. Because I had barely enough to keep a roof over my own head after Charles blacklisted me with every rancher in 3 counties. Bitterness crept into his voice. And because by then, Lily was already sick, and medical bills took everything else. The mention of his daughter's name changed the atmosphere instantly. Eleanor's expression softened. How is she now? A shadow crossed James's face. In remission, for now. Mike felt a twinge of shame for not having asked about his young cousin. Lily had been just 12 when James was fired, already battling the leukemia that had nearly taken her life twice. I'm glad she's doing better, he offered awkwardly. James acknowledged this with a terse nod before returning to the more urgent matter. These smugglers aren't playing around, Mike. If that python attacked the bull on conservation land, they'll be worried about exposure. They'll want to clean up any evidence, silence anyone who might connect them to it. Are you saying we're in danger? Sarah asked, unconsciously moving closer to the treatment area as if to shield her patients. I'm saying be careful, James replied. These people protected their operation once by destroying an entire family ranch. They won't hesitate to do worse. The ominous warning settled over the group. Inside the treatment area, Thunder had managed a few shaky steps, his massive frame moving stiffly but with growing confidence. Storm matched his pace perfectly, her body positioned to catch his weight if necessary. Eleanor watched them with tears glistening in her eyes. All they have is each other now, she said softly. Everything else was taken from them. James's expression hardened. Not everything. Not yet. He turned to Mike. I need to show you something. Out at my place. Something that might help you understand what we're really dealing with here. Mike hesitated, torn between suspicion of his cousin's motives and the undeniable urgency in his voice. Why not tell me now? Because seeing is believing, James replied cryptically. And because some things aren't safe to put into words where others might hear. A tense silence followed. It was Sarah who broke it, her practical nature asserting itself. You should go, Mike, she said firmly. Eleanor and I can manage here. Thunder is stable, and we have volunteers arriving this afternoon to help with the other animals. Eleanor nodded her agreement. Go. If there's a threat to this center, to these animals, we need to know what it is. Mike reluctantly agreed, though not without establishing precautions. Daniels stays here, he insisted, and I want hourly radio check-ins from everyone. As the men prepared to leave, Mike approached the treatment area one last time. Thunder had returned to his bedding of fresh straw, clearly exhausted from his brief exercise. Storm stood vigilant beside him, her intelligent eyes tracking Mike's approach. Take care of him, Mike found himself saying to the cow, feeling only slightly foolish for addressing her directly. We'll be back soon. To his amazement, Storm dipped her head in what almost seemed like acknowledgement before turning her attention back to Thunder. The drive to James's small ranch took nearly an hour, the men traveling in tense silence. James's property was a far cry from the sprawling Wilson Ranch of old, just 80 acres of scrubland with a modest house and a single barn. A few head of cattle grazed in the distance, thin but healthy enough. It's not much, James said defensively as they pulled up to the barn. But it's mine. Paid for. No bank can take it. Mike nodded, understanding the pride behind the words. Lily here? At her mother's this week? James's expression clouded. Which is probably for the best, given what I'm about to show you, He led Mike into the barn, which was surprisingly well maintained given the obvious financial constraints James operated under. At the far end, past the regular stalls, James unlocked a heavy door that opened into what appeared to be a storage room. 3 nights ago, he explained as he flipped on the light, I caught someone trespassing. Thought it was just kids at first, or maybe someone casing the place for a burglary. The room contained a single chair upon which sat a terrified young man bound securely with rope. He couldn't have been more than 20, with the gangly build of someone who had grown tall too quickly. His eyes widened at the sight of Mike's ranger uniform. "What the hell, James?" Mike exploded. "You can't just—" "He was carrying this," James interrupted, reaching behind a stack of feed bags to produce a canvas bag. He upended it on a small table, revealing a disturbing collection: syringes, vials of clear liquid, a stun gun, and most alarmingly, a set of heavy-duty snake-handling tools. "Tell him what you told me," James instructed the bound man, his voice hard. The young man swallowed visibly. "I was just doing a job, man. They said pick up the snake that got loose. Said it was somewhere on the old Wilson land. I didn't know it attacked anything." Mike's mind raced. "Who sent you?" "Guy named Vickers. Runs exotic imports through Laredo. I just do transport, that's all." His voice rose with panic. "Look, they've got my sister working for them too. If I don't bring back that snake or proof it's dead—" James crossed his arms. "Tell him the rest." The young man's face crumpled. "They know about the bull and cow on the news. Said they're witnesses. Said they need to be dealt with." A chill ran down Mike's spine. "Dealt with how?" "Accident. Make it look like the bull's injuries were worse than they seemed, or maybe a fire at the rescue center." Tears welled in the young man's eyes. "I didn't sign up for hurting animals, man, I swear, just transport, that's all." Mike turned to James, struggling to process this information, while also grappling with the illegality of his cousin's actions. "You can't hold someone captive, James. That's kidnapping." "And what would have happened if I'd called the sheriff?" James challenged. "By the time they took him in, processed him, these Vickers people would have known he was caught. What do you think would happen to his sister then? Or to those animals at the center?" The ethical dilemma was interrupted by the sudden blare of Mike's radio. He grabbed it, heart sinking at the panic in Daniel's voice. "Mike, we've got trouble. 2 men just pulled up claiming to be from the State Veterinary Board. Something's off. They're asking to examine Thunder and Storm specifically, and they've got tranquilizer equipment." James and Mike locked eyes, the family resemblance suddenly stark in their matching expressions of alarm. "Don't let them near those animals," Mike ordered into the radio. "Stall them. I'm on my way." He turned to James. "What do we do with him?" He gestured to the captive. James's jaw set in a hard line. "Go. I'll handle this. Just get back to the center before it's too late." Mike hesitated, torn between duty and urgency. "This isn't over, James. When those animals are safe, we're dealing with this properly." "I'd expect nothing less, cousin," James replied grimly. "Now go save those damn cattle before all of this is for nothing." Mike raced to his vehicle, tires spinning in the dusty yard as he accelerated toward the rescue center. His mind was a tumult of conflicting emotions: concern for Thunder and Storm, anger at James's vigilante actions, and a creeping fear that the danger was even greater than they'd imagined. Back at the center, Eleanor stood at the entrance, her frail body somehow blocking the way of 2 men in official-looking uniforms. Sarah and Daniels flanked her, a united front of protection. "I've worked with cattle for 60 years, Eleanor was saying, her voice carrying clearly across the yard, "and I've never once needed the state vet to arrive unannounced with enough tranquilizer to down a herd of elephants." The taller of the 2 men maintained a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ma'am, we understand your concern, but after the recent incident, the department needs to ensure these animals aren't carrying any diseases that could spread to other livestock." "Funny timing," Sarah remarked coldly. just when they're starting to recover, just when they've become local celebrities. The second man, shorter and more heavy-set, shifted impatiently. "Look, we have authorization. Either you let us examine these animals or we'll come back with law enforcement." "That won't be necessary," Mike called as he approached, hand resting meaningfully on his sidearm. "I am law enforcement, and I'd like to see that authorization." The two men exchanged glances. The taller one produced a folder of documents which Mike examined carefully. They looked official, too official in fact, with every possible signature and stamp included, as if overcompensating. "Interesting," Mike said casually. "I just got off the phone with Dr. Reyes at the state office. He mentioned they haven't dispatched any field vets to our county this month due to budget cuts." It was a bluff, but it hit home. The shorter man's hand twitched toward his jacket pocket, and Mike's instincts screamed danger. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered sharply. "Both of you, now." The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Then with a sudden movement, the shorter man shoved Eleanor aside and bolted toward the treatment area. His partner reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for a radio. "They're on to us," he barked into it. "Plan B, now." Mike tackled the man even as Daniels drew her weapon and raced after the other intruder. The sound of an engine roaring to life somewhere behind the center suggested there were more players involved than just these two. Inside the treatment area, Thunder and Storm had sensed the commotion. The massive bull was on his feet, Storm positioned protectively in front of him despite his superior size and strength. When the shorter vet burst in, Storm lowered her head threateningly, a low rumble emanating from her throat. "Get away from them!" Sarah shouted, having followed close behind. The man ignored her, pulling a syringe from his pocket and lunging toward the cattle. What happened next would later be described by Sarah as the most coordinated defensive maneuver I've ever witnessed from any animals, domestic or wild. Storm feinted to one side, drawing the man's attention and causing him to adjust his trajectory. In that split second, Thunder surged forward with unexpected speed for an injured animal, catching the intruder with a powerful sweep of his horns that sent the man flying into the wall. The syringe clattered to the floor as the man slumped, dazed but conscious. Daniels arrived moments later, weapon trained on him as she radioed for backup. Outside, Mike had subdued the other fake veterinarian, securing him with zip ties from his utility belt. The sound of squealing tires suggested their accomplices had fled, unwilling to risk capture. "Everyone okay?" he called, scanning the group anxiously. Eleanor was being helped to her feet by Sarah, shaken but unhurt. "Just my pride bruised," the elderly woman assured him. "Though I'd have liked to see Thunder deal with them all." Inside the treatment area, an extraordinary scene unfolded. Thunder, having exerted himself far beyond what his healing body should have allowed, stood trembling with exhaustion. Without hesitation, Storm positioned herself against his side, bracing his massive frame with her own. Together they managed a slow, dignified retreat to the bedding area, where Thunder carefully lowered himself down, Storm never leaving his side. "They protected each other," Sarah said wonderingly as she rejoined the others. "Not just Storm protecting Thunder because he's injured, but both of them working together." Eleanor nodded, tears in her eyes. "That's what real love looks like, dear. Not just standing by in good times, but fighting together when it matters most." As police sirens wailed in the distance, Mike found himself watching the cattle with new understanding. What he'd witnessed wasn't just instinct or training or even simple bonding. It was something deeper, something that transcended easy classification, a connection that had given an injured bull the strength to fight, that had given a gentle cow the courage to stand against a threat, that had somehow created something greater than the sum of its parts. In that moment, standing amid the chaos of thwarted criminals and approaching authorities, Mike understood what his mother had tried to teach him all those years ago, that the capacity for loyalty, for love, for self-sacrifice wasn't uniquely human after all. It existed wherever beings formed true connections, even in a weathered barn in South Texas, between two abandoned Brahmin cattle who had nothing left in the world but each other. And as Eleanor had said, sometimes that was enough. 2 weeks after the attempted attack at the rescue center, Thunder had recovered enough for Dr. Sarah Morgan to consider moving him to the outdoor rehabilitation enclosure. The massive Brahman bull still favored his injured side, but his breathing had normalized, and the deep bruising across his ribcage had faded to yellowish smudges barely visible beneath his white coat. "Medically speaking, it's a remarkable recovery," Sarah told Mike as they observed Thunder and Storm from the edge of the treatment area. "I've never seen anything like it. Most cattle with comparable injuries would take months to reach this stage." Mike nodded, watching as Storm gently nudged a fresh pile of hay closer to Thunder, a behavior that had become familiar over the past weeks. "You think it's because of her?" Sarah's professional demeanor softened. "A month ago, I would have dismissed that as sentimentality. Now?" She shook her head. "I've started to believe there are aspects of healing we don't fully understand. Connection, companionship, purpose, these aren't just human needs. They're fundamentally tied to recovery across species." The rescue center had transformed in the weeks following the thwarted attack. The story had made national news, bringing attention not just to Thunder and Storm's remarkable bond, but to the broader issues of exotic animal trafficking and the plight of abandoned livestock. Donations had poured in from across the country, allowing for critical upgrades to the aging facility. The leaking roof had been replaced, new medical equipment installed, and security cameras mounted at strategic points around the property. "The rehabilitation enclosure is ready whenever you think they are," Mike said. "Full video monitoring, secure fencing, partial roofing for shade, about as close to paradise as we can make it." Sarah smiled, an expression that had become more frequent as the weeks passed. "Let's plan for tomorrow morning. Thunder's last round of antibiotics finishes tonight, and the weather's supposed to be mild." Their conversation was interrupted by Eleanor's arrival. The elderly woman moved with more energy these days, her back a little straighter, her steps more purposeful. The renewed attention to her beloved animals seemed to have breathed fresh life into her. "The television people are here again," she announced, not bothering to hide her pride. "National Geographic this time. They want to do a special on animal bonds in unexpected places." Mike suppressed a smile at Eleanor's obvious delight. "You're becoming quite the media coordinator, Eleanor." She waved away his teasing. "It's not about attention, it's about education. People need to understand that animals aren't just things. They feel, they connect, they mourn." Her voice softened as she gazed at Thunder and Storm. "They love." The investigation into the exotic animal trafficking ring had gained momentum after the capture of the fake veterinarians. Both men had quickly turned informant in exchange for reduced charges, revealing a sophisticated operation that spanned multiple states and involved several seemingly legitimate animal importation businesses. James Wilson had surrendered his captive to authorities after extracting a promise of protection for the young man's sister. The decision had been surprisingly well received by the local sheriff, who had been tracking the trafficking ring for months without a solid lead. James now worked as a consultant to the investigation, his knowledge of local land and old smuggling routes proving invaluable. "Any update from the task force?" Sarah asked, nodding toward Mike's radio. "They raided 2 more properties yesterday," he replied. "Found evidence of python breeding and documents linking the operation to buyers in 4 states. Still no sign of Vickers, though. He seems to have gone underground." Eleanor's expression darkened at the mention of the trafficking ringleader. "Men like that always slip through the cracks, just like the ones who destroyed my son." Mike placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. We'll find him, Eleanor. He's running out of places to hide. Inside the treatment area, Thunder had risen to his feet, moving with growing confidence despite his still healing injuries. Storm stayed close, her body positioned to offer support if needed, though Thunder relied on her less each day. Their movements had a synchronized quality, as if they communicated through some silent language of gesture and proximity. "They're ready," Sarah decided, watching the pair navigate the confined space with increasing restlessness. They need more room to move to begin strengthening those muscles properly. The decision made, preparations began for the next morning's transfer. The rehabilitation enclosure, originally designed for recovering deer and smaller mammals, had been expanded and reinforced to accommodate the massive cattle. A shallow pond had been added, along with a shaded feeding area and soft bedding of fresh straw. Most importantly, it offered space, nearly an acre of ground where Thunder could rebuild his strength and Storm could move more freely than the treatment area allowed. Dawn broke clear and mild the next day, perfect weather for the transfer. Thunder seemed to sense the impending change, standing alert near the treatment area door, while Storm paced beside him with uncharacteristic restlessness. "They know something's up," Mike observed as he and Sarah prepared the transport equipment. Sarah nodded. Cattle are far more perceptive than most people realize. They recognize patterns, anticipate changes in routine. These two especially. The plan was straightforward. Guide Thunder and Storm into the livestock trailer, drive the short distance to the rehabilitation enclosure, and release them into their new temporary home. Simple in theory, but potentially stressful for animals recovering from trauma. "We'll take it slow," Sarah instructed the small team of volunteers. "No sudden movements, no loud noises. Let them set the pace." Eleanor stationed herself near the trailer ramp, a bucket of feed in hand. "Come on, my beauties," she called softly. "Time for a little adventure." To everyone's surprise, Thunder approached the trailer without hesitation, Storm following close behind. There was a moment of tension as the massive bull paused at the ramp, nostrils flaring as he assessed this new development. Storm nudged him gently, as if offering encouragement, and Thunder continued forward, stepping carefully into the trailer with Storm right behind. "Well, that was easier than expected," Sarah remarked as they secured the trailer door. Mike nodded, though something about the animal's ready compliance struck him as significant. It's almost like they understand this is for their benefit. The short drive to the rehabilitation enclosure passed without incident. Thunder and Storm stood calmly in the trailer, occasionally touching noses as if reassuring each other. When they arrived, the team positioned the trailer directly against the enclosure's gate, creating a straight path from one to the other. "Ready when you are," Mike called to Sarah, who stood by the release mechanism. With a nod, she opened the trailer door and stepped back, giving the animals space to emerge at their own pace. Thunder appeared first, his massive head emerging cautiously as he surveyed his new surroundings. He took a tentative step down the ramp, then another, his movements growing more confident as he entered the enclosure. Storm followed, maintaining her customary position slightly behind and to the side of him. What happened next became another chapter in the growing legend of Thunder and Storm. As they fully entered the enclosure, both animals stopped, standing perfectly still as they surveyed the open space before them. Then, with no discernible signal, Thunder began to run. It wasn't the full gallop of a healthy bull, but a determined trot that gradually built speed, his powerful legs stretching in freedom for the first time in weeks. Storm kept pace beside him, their bodies moving in perfect synchronization as they circled the enclosure once, twice, 3 times before finally slowing near the pond. "My God," Eleanor whispered, tears streaming freely down her weathered cheeks. "Look at them. Just look at them." Even Sarah, usually so composed, appeared moved by the display. That's not normal post-recovery behavior, she admitted. That's joy, pure and simple. Mike found himself smiling as Thunder and Storm explored their new home, investigating the pond, the feeding station, the shaded rest area. Their movements were purposeful, coordinated, communicative in ways that transcended typical animal behavior. "They'll do well here," he said confidently. "It's a good step toward their eventual release." The prospect of returning Thunder and Storm to the wild had become a topic of increasing discussion as their recovery progressed. The conservation area offered protected land where they could roam freely, but concerns remained about their ability to fend for themselves after years of domestication. They'll need to relearn foraging skills, predator awareness, Sarah had pointed out in earlier conversations, and there's their bond to consider. Releasing them together creates complications for integration with existing herds. Yet watching them now, moving with such evident awareness of each other and their surroundings, Mike felt a growing confidence that these remarkable animals would find their way together wherever they ended up. The team left Thunder and Storm to settle into their new environment, returning to the main rescue center with a shared sense of accomplishment. The morning's success represented more than just a medical milestone. It was a vindication of weeks of intensive care, of Eleanor's unwavering faith, of Sarah's evolving understanding of animal cognition. "I've been thinking," Sarah said as they walked back, her voice thoughtful. "The traditional recovery protocol would be to gradually separate them once Thunder is stronger, to prepare them for potential placement in different herds." Eleanor's head snapped up, alarm evident in her expression. "You can't separate them." "Not after everything." Sarah held up a reassuring hand. "That's exactly my point, Eleanor. I don't think we should. What we're witnessing between them isn't just companionship or even herd instinct. It's a genuine bond, possibly as complex in its own way as human relationships. Breaking that could cause profound psychological harm to both animals." Mike nodded his agreement. "So what are you suggesting?" "I think we need to consider them a bonded pair for all future planning," Sarah replied. "Whatever happens, whether they're released to the conservation area or placed in a sanctuary, they stay together." The decision, once made, seemed obvious to everyone involved. Thunder and Storm had demonstrated time and again that their connection transcended normal cattle behavior. They communicated through subtle movements, anticipated each other's needs, coordinated their actions with remarkable precision. Separating them would be not just cruel, but contrary to everything the rescue center stood for. Over the next few days, Thunder's strength returned rapidly in the larger space. His movements grew more fluid, his appetite increased, and the last visible signs of injury faded. Storm remained his constant companion, though her role subtly shifted from caretaker to partner as Thunder's recovery progressed. Visitors came daily to observe the famous pair. Local ranchers curious about the cattle they'd heard so much about, school children on educational trips, even a team of animal behaviorists from a nearby university who set up cameras to document the unique relationship. "They've become ambassadors," Eleanor told Mike proudly one evening as they watched Thunder and Storm from the observation platform. "Changing how people think about livestock, about animal emotions, that's a legacy worth having." Mike smiled at the elderly woman's evident satisfaction. "Your son should see this," he said gently. "See what you've accomplished here." Eleanor's expression clouded briefly. "Charles made his choices long ago, left these animals behind like they meant nothing." She straightened her shoulders. "I'm making different choices." The peaceful routine established at the rehabilitation enclosure continued for nearly a week. Thunder grew stronger daily, occasionally testing his recovered strength with short bursts of running or playful headbutting against the sturdy scratching posts installed for that purpose. Storm seemed to blossom in the larger space as well, her movements more relaxed, her attention occasionally drifting from Thunder as her constant vigilance became less necessary. Then, on the seventh morning, everything changed. Mike arrived at the center to find Sarah and Eleanor already at the observation platform, their expressions tense. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately alert to their concern. "Storm's gone," Sarah said bluntly. "She was there at the evening check, but this morning—" She gestured to the enclosure where Thunder stood alone, pacing the perimeter fence with evident distress. Mike's mind raced through possibilities. Could she have jumped the fence? Escaped somehow? Sarah shook her head. "The fencing is 8 feet high with an inward curve at the top, and we've reviewed the overnight security footage. At 2:17 a.m. the cameras went dark for exactly 6 minutes. When they came back online, Storm was gone." A cold weight settled in Mike's stomach. Someone took her. Eleanor's hands gripped the railing, her knuckles white. "It's them, isn't it? The smugglers. They came back." Before Mike could respond, his radio crackled. It was Daniels, her voice tight with urgency. "Mike, you need to see this. North perimeter of the enclosure. Tire tracks, wire cutters left behind, and blood." "Not much, but enough to be concerning." Thunder's distress was growing more evident by the minute. The massive bull charged the fence repeatedly, not with enough force to break through, but with clear purpose, always at the same section facing north. His vocalizations had changed from low bellows to sharp, demanding calls that echoed across the compound. "He knows which way they took her," Mike realized aloud. "He's trying to follow." Sarah nodded grimly. "The security footage shows him reacting the moment the cameras came back on. He went directly to that section of fence and hasn't left it since." Mike made a quick decision. "I need to follow those tracks while they're still fresh. Daniels can coordinate with local law enforcement. We need to set up roadblocks, check any properties with connections to Vickers or his operation." "What about Thunder?" Eleanor asked, her voice breaking as she watched the bull's increasingly frantic movements. "He's going to injure himself all over again if he keeps this up." It was a valid concern. Thunder was throwing himself against the fence with growing force, his recently healed ribs at risk with each impact. His distress was palpable, a visceral reaction to Storm's absence that transcended normal animal behavior. Sarah bit her lip, considering options. "We could sedate him, but with his history of trauma, I'm reluctant to add chemical stress to emotional distress." "Then let him out." James Wilson's voice came from behind them. He approached the platform, dressed in work clothes with a determined set to his jaw. "Let him show us where they took her." Mike turned to his cousin in surprise. "James? What are you doing here?" "Got word about Storm being taken," James replied tersely. "Thought you could use someone who knows how these operations work." "And I'm telling you, that bull knows something we don't." Eleanor looked between the cousins, old tensions momentarily forgotten in the face of the current crisis. "James is right," she said firmly. "Thunder's not just panicking, he's trying to tell us something. We need to listen." The suggestion was unprecedented, releasing a partially recovered bull to potentially lead them to criminals. Yet watching Thunder's determined efforts to breach the fence, Mike couldn't dismiss the possibility that the animal possessed information they needed. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we do it carefully. Thunder wears a tracking collar. We follow at a safe distance. At the first sign of danger to him or to us, we call in backup and reassess." Sarah nodded, already moving toward the equipment shed. "I'll get the mobile veterinary kit and the tracking collar. Eleanor, can you prepare some feed with electrolytes? He'll need energy for whatever comes next." James stepped closer to Mike, speaking low enough that only his cousin could hear. "You should know. Word is Vickers is desperate. The federal investigation has frozen his accounts, seized his properties. Taking Storm is likely a leverage play, a way to draw attention away from his other operations while he makes a run for the border. Mike's jaw tightened. All the more reason to find her quickly. Preparations moved swiftly after that. Thunder was fitted with a tracking collar, though it took 3 people to accomplish this, as the bull was too agitated to stand still. Food and water were provided, though he barely touched either, his attention fixed on the northern perimeter where Storm had been taken. "We're ready," Sarah announced, loading the last of her medical supplies into Mike's vehicle. "The moment we open that gate, he's going to run. We need to be prepared to follow at whatever pace he sets." Mike surveyed the small team assembled for the search. Himself, Sarah, James, and Ranger Daniels. Eleanor had wanted to come but reluctantly agreed to remain at the center as their communication hub, coordinating with law enforcement and monitoring the tracking signal. "Everyone clear on the plan?" Mike asked. "We follow Thunder, but safety is our priority. No heroics, no confrontations without backup. If we locate Storm, we call in the authorities immediately." With nods of agreement all around, Mike gave the signal. The enclosure gate swung open, and Thunder burst through like a white lightning bolt, his powerful body moving with surprising speed for an animal so recently injured. He didn't hesitate, didn't explore, just ran with single-minded purpose toward the northern edge of the property. "Here we go," Mike muttered, jumping into his vehicle with Sarah beside him. James and Daniels followed in a separate truck, maintaining radio contact as they pursued the surprisingly swift bull across the rugged terrain. Thunder moved with the determination of an animal on a mission, following a path only he could perceive. He navigated around obstacles, crossed streams, pushed through thickets of mesquite with unwavering focus. The tracking collar showed his heart rate elevated but not dangerously so, adrenaline and purpose driving him forward despite his recent injuries. "He's heading straight for the old Wilson property line," James observed over the radio after nearly 20 minutes of pursuit. "That area backs up against 3,000 acres of private ranch land. Perfect hiding spot for someone who doesn't want to be found." Mike nodded grimly, though only Sarah could see the gesture. "That fits with the smuggling routes you mentioned. Remote, minimal surveillance, easy access to county roads that lead to the border." As they crested a small rise, Thunder suddenly stopped, his massive head raised as he tested the air. He let out a low, rumbling bellow that seemed to carry for miles across the Texas landscape. From somewhere ahead, barely audible over the idling engines, came an answering call. "Storm." Thunder's massive frame went rigid at the sound of Storm's answering call. His ears swiveled forward, head raised high, every muscle tensed in alert recognition. Then, with a powerful bellow that seemed to shake the very air around them, he surged forward with renewed purpose, leaving the pursuit team scrambling to keep pace. "He's got her location," Mike said tersely into the radio as their vehicles bounced over the uneven terrain. "Everyone stay sharp. We're likely heading straight into Vickers' operation." The landscape changed as they crossed onto what had once been Wilson Ranch property. The relatively open conservation land gave way to thicker brush and scattered mesquite, perfect cover for illicit activities. Thunder navigated the increasingly difficult terrain with uncanny precision, following a path invisible to human eyes but crystal clear to his senses. 2 miles to the old line shack, James reported from the second vehicle. Beyond that is a narrow ravine that cuts through to the neighboring Blackwell property. Isolated, hard to surveil, easy to defend. Mike nodded grimly. "Perfect smuggling corridor. Any idea what we might be walking into?" "Based on the other operations we've busted, probably a temporary holding facility," Daniels replied. "These guys move quickly, keep animals just long enough to arrange transport to buyers. Storm would be valuable for breeding stock." The thought of Storm being used that way, as nothing more than a genetic resource, separated forever from Thunder, sent a wave of anger through Mike. Over the past weeks, he'd come to see these animals as individuals with genuine emotional lives, not just livestock or commodities. The bond between them represented something rare and precious, something worth protecting at considerable risk. Thunder slowed as they approached a dense thicket of live oak and mesquite, his massive head lowered as he sniffed the ground intently. He moved more cautiously now, instinct perhaps warning him of potential danger ahead. The tracking collar showed his heart rate elevated but steady, not panic but heightened awareness. "We need to proceed on foot from here," Mike decided, bringing his vehicle to a stop in a small clearing. "Engines will give us away." Sarah gathered her medical kit, face set with determination. "I'm coming too. If Storm's injured, she'll need immediate attention." Mike wanted to object, but knew she was right. "Stay behind me, move only when I signal, and be ready to retreat fast if things go south." James and Daniels joined them, the former carrying a rifle that Mike chose not to question the legality of. The four humans advanced slowly, following Thunder's deliberate path through the thicket. The massive bull moved with surprising stealth for his size, testing each step, occasionally pausing to scent the air or listen intently. "He's hunting," James observed quietly. "Using every sense to track her. Never seen anything like it in domestic cattle." After several tense minutes of slow advancement, Thunder froze, his ears flicking forward. From beyond a dense stand of trees came a low, unmistakable sound. Storm's distinctive call, but with a note of distress that even the humans could recognize. Thunder responded with a soft, rumbling sound that seemed carefully modulated, almost as if he was consciously controlling his volume to avoid detection. Then he changed direction slightly, circling to approach from downwind of the sound's source. "Smart," James murmured. "He's using the wind to his advantage, concealing his scent." The team followed Thunder's lead, moving in a wide arc until they reached a position sheltered by a rocky outcropping. From this vantage point, they could see a small clearing ahead where a rusted metal shed stood beside a dilapidated wooden structure, the line shack James had mentioned. Two pickup trucks were parked nearby, and a livestock trailer was positioned against the shed's entrance. Most significantly, a portable metal corral had been set up beside the shed, and within it stood Storm. The beautiful Brahman cow appeared uninjured but distressed, pacing the small enclosure and occasionally calling out softly. A man with a rifle stood guard nearby, looking bored and occasionally checking his watch. "One visible guard," Mike whispered, scanning the area with experienced eyes. But there could be more inside the buildings. Thunder had stopped at the edge of their cover, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on Storm. The intensity of his focus was almost palpable, a physical force radiating from the massive bull. He shifted his weight forward, clearly preparing to charge directly into the clearing. "We need to stop him," Sarah whispered urgently. "He'll get himself killed running into an armed camp." Mike nodded, moving cautiously toward the bull with hands raised in a calming gesture. "Easy, big guy," he murmured. "We need a plan first." To his surprise, Thunder held his position, though every line of his powerful body communicated barely restrained urgency. He turned his head toward Mike, their eyes meeting in what felt like genuine communication. Impatience, determination, and something that looked remarkably like trust. "He's waiting for us to help," Sarah said softly, wonder evident in her voice despite the tense situation. "He understands we're here for the same reason he is." Mike turned to the others, keeping his voice low. "We need to call in backup, but cell reception is spotty out here. Daniels, try to get to higher ground and contact Eleanor. Tell her to send the sheriff and any available rangers to these coordinates." Daniels nodded, slipping away quietly while Mike continued outlining the plan. "James, circle around to the east side of the clearing. If you see an opportunity to create a distraction, take it, but don't engage directly unless absolutely necessary." James checked his rifle, his expression hardening. "And if they start moving Storm before backup arrives?" Mike met his cousin's gaze steadily. "Then we improvise. But our priority is getting everyone out safely. Storm, Thunder, and ourselves." As James moved into position, Mike turned to Sarah. "Stay here with Thunder. Keep him calm if you can. I'm going to get closer. Try to assess how many people we're dealing with." Sarah nodded, shifting closer to the massive bull, who remained remarkably still despite his obvious urgency. "Be careful," she whispered. Mike crept forward through the underbrush, using every skill developed through years of wilderness work to move silently. As he drew closer to the clearing, voices became audible from within the line shack. "Vickers wants her moved by nightfall," a gruff voice was saying. "Buyer in Laredo is paying premium for certified Brahman breeding stock, especially with her coloring." "What about the tracking?" another voice replied. "You saw the news. That cow's famous now. People will look for her." A dismissive snort. "That's why we're taking her across the border tonight. By the time they organize a proper search, she'll be in a breeding program 200 miles from here with no ID and no paperwork." The conversation confirmed Mike's worst fears. Once Storm crossed into Mexico, the chances of recovering her would be virtually zero. They had hours at most to rescue her, with or without backup. A sudden commotion from the direction James had gone interrupted Mike's surveillance. A sharp crack echoed through the trees, not a gunshot, but the sound of breaking wood, followed by shouting from the guard. "Something tripped the perimeter alarm," the guard called toward the line shack. "East side." The distraction drew the men from the building, 3 of them, Mike noted, all armed. They moved toward the eastern perimeter, weapons ready, leaving the guard alone with Storm. It was now or never. Mike retreated quickly to where Sarah waited with Thunder. James created a distraction. "There are 4 armed men total, 3 investigating the noise. We need to move now while Storm is guarded by just 1 man." Sarah's face paled slightly, but she nodded. "What's the plan?" "I'll approach from the south, try to neutralize the guard. Once I signal, bring Thunder in as quickly and quietly as possible." Mike started to move, but Thunder suddenly pushed past him, heading directly toward the clearing at a determined trot. "Thunder, no!" Sarah hissed, but the bull paid no attention. Mike made a split-second decision. Change of plan. "Follow him, but stay back until I can deal with the guard." He raced ahead, trying to intercept the guard's line of sight before Thunder emerged from cover. The element of surprise was their only advantage, and the bull was about to eliminate it completely. But Thunder had his own strategy. Instead of charging directly into the clearing, he circled to approach from behind the portable corral, using the metal structure itself as cover. It was a level of tactical thinking Mike would never have attributed to a bull, domestic or wild. The guard remained focused on the commotion to the east, his back to Storm's enclosure. Mike used the opportunity to close the distance, drawing his service weapon as he approached. When he was within 20 yards, he called out firmly, "Texas Parks and Wildlife, drop your weapon." The guard spun, raising his rifle instinctively, but froze at the sight of Mike's drawn weapon. For a tense moment, the standoff held, neither man moving. Then 2 things happened simultaneously. From the east came the sharp crack of a rifle shot, James presumably engaging the other men, and from behind the corral emerged Thunder, not in a wild charge but in a deliberate, menacing advance that instantly drew the guard's attention. The man's eyes widened at the sight of the massive bull bearing down on him. He swung his rifle toward this new threat, his finger tightening on the trigger. Mike fired first, his shot striking the guard's shoulder. The man dropped his weapon with a cry of pain, stumbling backward as Thunder continued his advance, now picking up speed. "Stay down!" Mike shouted to the wounded guard as he raced forward. The guard had no intention of challenging the approaching bull. He scrambled away, clutching his bleeding shoulder, and disappeared into the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. Storm had begun calling frantically from the moment Thunder appeared, straining against the corral panels that separated them. Thunder reached the enclosure and immediately began pushing against the metal structure, his massive strength bending the portable fencing. "The gate!" Sarah called as she emerged from cover. "There's a latch on the near side." Mike holstered his weapon and ran to the corral gate, quickly locating the chain and bolt securing it. A few seconds of fumbling, and the gate swung open. Storm burst from the enclosure, meeting Thunder in what could only be described as an embrace. The two massive animals pressed their heads together, Storm making soft sounds unlike anything Mike had heard from cattle before, almost like purring, interspersed with gentle lowing. The reunion was cut short by the sound of approaching voices. The three men were returning, alerted by the gunshot. "We need to move, now," Mike urged, waving Sarah toward the cover of the trees. "Thunder! Storm! Come on!" To his amazement, both animals responded to his call, breaking their reunion to follow him toward the shelter of the forest. They moved with surprising speed and coordination, Storm occasionally stumbling from exhaustion but Thunder staying close, supporting her with his massive frame. They had just reached the edge of the clearing when the smugglers emerged from the opposite side. Shouts of anger were followed immediately by gunfire, bullets splintering tree bark uncomfortably close to their position. "Keep going," Mike urged, returning fire to provide covering fire. "Head for the vehicles." The retreat became a desperate race through the underbrush, punctuated by the crack of gunfire and the crashing of vegetation as Thunder and Storm forced their way through. Sarah ran ahead, leading the cattle toward their waiting vehicles, while Mike covered their rear, exchanging occasional shots with their pursuers. They had almost reached the vehicles when Sarah's scream brought Mike spinning around. Storm had collapsed, her legs buckling beneath her as exhaustion and stress finally took their toll. Thunder stopped immediately, nudging her prone form with growing urgency. "She's in shock," Sarah reported, kneeling beside the fallen cow despite the danger. "Probably dehydrated, too. She can't go any further on her own." Mike made a quick calculation of their options. None of them good. The smugglers were gaining ground. Their vehicles were still 100 yards away. And now they had an 800-pound cow unable to walk. "Go get the truck," he told Sarah. "Bring it as close as you can. I'll hold them off." Sarah hesitated, clearly torn between medical duty and practical necessity. "What about Storm?" Before Mike could answer, Thunder took action. With a determined rumble, the massive bull positioned himself beside Storm's prone form. He lowered himself to his knees, then to his side, pressing his body against hers in what appeared to be a deliberate attempt to shield her from harm. "He's protecting her," Sarah whispered, awe momentarily overriding fear. "Using himself as a shield." Mike nodded grimly. "And I'll protect them both. Now go." As Sarah raced for the vehicles, Mike took up a defensive position behind a fallen log, his service weapon ready. The smugglers were advancing cautiously now, aware they were heading into potential ambush. From his position, Mike could see Thunder and Storm clearly. The bull had positioned himself between the approaching danger and his fallen companion, his massive head lowered in a stance that communicated unmistakable threat. Despite his own recent injuries, despite the gunfire and danger, Thunder's focus remained absolute: protect Storm at all costs. The first smuggler came into view, rifle raised, scanning the forest cautiously. Mike lined up his shot, aiming for the man's leg to disable rather than kill. But before he could fire, a different shot rang out from the east, James, providing unexpected support. The smuggler fell with a cry of pain, clutching his thigh. His companions immediately took cover, returning fire in James's direction. The distraction gave Mike the opportunity he needed. "Thunder," he called softly, hoping against hope the bull would understand. "We need to move Storm. Now." To his astonishment, Thunder rose carefully to his feet, positioning himself alongside Storm's prone form. He lowered his massive head, nudging her repeatedly, almost as if trying to encourage her to stand. Storm stirred, raising her head weakly. With evident effort, she managed to get her front legs underneath her, but her hind quarters remained uncooperative. The sound of an approaching engine signaled Sarah's return with the vehicle. She had managed to drive it much closer than Mike had thought possible, navigating between trees and over rough ground with determined precision. "We need to load her," Mike called, abandoning his position to help. "Can you back the trailer up to her?" Sarah nodded, maneuvering the vehicle with careful precision until the livestock trailer was just feet from where Storm struggled to rise. Mike lowered the ramp, creating a path into the trailer. "We need to get her on her feet," Sarah said, reaching for her medical kit. "I can give her a stimulant, but it will take a few minutes to work." Minutes they didn't have, as another exchange of gunfire from James's position indicated. The smugglers were regrouping, preparing to rush their location in force. Once again, Thunder demonstrated an understanding that defied conventional wisdom about cattle cognition. The massive bull positioned himself directly behind Storm, lowering his head to press against her hindquarters. With a determined push, he literally forced her to her feet, supporting her weight as she stumbled forward. "He's helping her walk," Sarah gasped, watching as Thunder guided the weakened Storm toward the trailer ramp. "I've never seen anything like it." Together, they managed to get Storm into the trailer, Thunder staying close by her side, supporting her when she threatened to collapse again. Once both animals were secured, Mike slammed the trailer door shut and ran for the driver's seat. "What about James?" Sarah asked as she climbed into the passenger side. As if in answer, James himself emerged from the trees, running hard. Behind him came the remaining smugglers, now abandoning caution in their pursuit. "Go!" James shouted, waving them off as he dove for cover behind a fallen tree. "I'll hold them here!" Mike hesitated, torn between the need to protect the animals and his reluctance to abandon his cousin. The decision was made for him when James rose briefly to fire 3 rapid shots, forcing the smugglers back into cover. "He's buying us time," Sarah said urgently. "We need to take it." With a grim nod, Mike gunned the engine, the truck and trailer lurching forward over the uneven ground. In the side mirror, he caught a glimpse of James exchanging fire with the smugglers before the trees obscured his view completely. "We're leaving him behind," Mike said tightly, guilt warring with practicality. Sarah placed a hand on his arm. "He made his choice. Our responsibility is to get Thunder and Storm to safety. Then we can send help back for James." The journey back to the rescue center was tense and fraught with worry. For James, left behind in a gunfight. For Storm, weakened and distressed in the trailer. For Thunder, whose remarkable actions had saved them all. Ranger Daniels met them at the entrance to the property, accompanied by sheriff's deputies and additional rangers. "Backup is on the way to James's location," she reported. "The sheriff has a helicopter in the air and units converging on the area." "And Vickers?" Mike asked as he backed the trailer toward the treatment area. "No sign of him at the line shack, but they found documentation linking him to 3 more properties along the border. It's a major break in the case." Mike nodded, though his thoughts were more immediate. "We need to get Storm checked out right away. She collapsed during the escape. Exhaustion, dehydration, possibly shock." Sarah was already moving toward the trailer, medical kit in hand. When they opened the door, they found a scene that added yet another chapter to Thunder and Storm's remarkable story. The massive bull had positioned himself so that Storm could lean against him, taking the weight off her weakened legs during the bumpy journey. He'd also managed to maneuver the water bucket within her reach, despite the confined space and moving vehicle. "He's been taking care of her the whole way," Sarah said softly. "Not just staying with her, actively helping her." They carefully unloaded the pair, Thunder staying close to Storm's side as they guided her to the treatment area. Eleanor was waiting, her weathered face etched with concern that transformed to relief at the sight of both animals alive, if not entirely well. "Oh, my beautiful girl," she murmured, reaching out to stroke Storm's face as the cow was settled onto fresh bedding. "You've been so brave." Storm's condition, while concerning, wasn't critical. Sarah's examination revealed dehydration, exhaustion, and bruising from rough handling, but no lasting damage. Thunder refused to leave her side during the examination, watching Sarah's every move with intense focus. "She'll need fluids, rest, and careful monitoring," Sarah reported when she'd finished. "But I expect a full recovery, especially with her personal nurse watching over her." The reference to Thunder's protective behavior brought a smile to Eleanor's tired face. He saved her, just like she saved him. As night fell, word came from the sheriff's department. The smugglers had been apprehended, including 2 found tied up near the line shack. James's handiwork, apparently. James himself had sustained a minor injury, but was being treated at the local hospital and was expected to make a full recovery. "He's asking about the cattle," Daniels reported with a small smile. "Wanted to know if Thunder's rescue mission was successful." Mike nodded, looking toward the treatment area where Thunder maintained his vigilant watch over the resting Storm. "Tell him it was more successful than any of us could have imagined." Later, as Mike sat quietly beside the treatment area, watching Thunder and Storm in the soft glow of the night lights, he found himself reflecting on everything he'd witnessed. The massive bull had demonstrated intelligence, strategy, self-sacrifice, and devotion beyond anything Mike had believed possible in cattle. In any non-human animal, really. Eleanor joined him, lowering herself carefully onto the bench beside him. For a while they sat in companionable silence, observing the 2 animals who had changed their understanding of what it meant to care for another being. "You know," Eleanor finally said, her voice soft with memory, "when I was a girl, my father told me that animals were put on this earth for us to use, that they didn't feel things the way we do, didn't have souls like humans do." She shook her head slowly. "I believed that for a long time." "It made it easier, I suppose, raising livestock for a living." Mike nodded, understanding. "My mother taught me differently, but I still kept a certain professional distance. Even as a ranger, I saw animals as things to be managed, protected as resources rather than as individuals." "And now?" Eleanor asked, though the question seemed rhetorical. Mike's gaze returned to Thunder and Storm. The massive bull had positioned himself so that Storm could rest her head against his shoulder, their bodies touching along their entire length. Even in sleep, they maintained connection, finding comfort in each other's presence. "Now I think we've been getting it wrong all along," he said quietly. "Maybe the capacity for love, for devotion, for self-sacrifice. Maybe that's not uniquely human after all. Maybe it exists wherever beings form true connections." Eleanor smiled, tears glistening in her eyes as she watched the sleeping cattle. "It took these 2 to teach us that. Imagine what else we might learn if we're willing to really see them, not as livestock or resources or commodities, but as what they truly are." "And what's that?" Mike asked softly. Eleanor's answer was simple but profound, a truth that Thunder and Storm had demonstrated through actions more powerful than words. "Beings capable of love," she said. "Just like us." 3 days after Storm's rescue, the skies opened up over South Texas in a torrential downpour that turned dirt roads to mud and flooded the low-lying areas of the conservation land. The rescue center, situated on slightly higher ground, remained dry but isolated as access routes became temporarily impassable. For Mike Foster, the forced isolation provided a welcome respite from the media attention that had intensified following the dramatic rescue and subsequent arrests of Vickers' men. National Geographic called again, Eleanor reported, joining Mike at the observation window overlooking the treatment area where Storm continued her recovery. They want to send a full film crew once the road's clear. Discovery Channel, too. Mike nodded absently, his attention focused on the two cattle inside. Storm had regained much of her strength, though she still moved with the careful deliberation of an animal recovering from exhaustion and trauma. Thunder remained her constant companion, his massive frame never far from her side, his attention so focused on her well-being that he sometimes needed prompting to eat his own food. The sheriff called too, Eleanor continued. They found Vickers trying to cross into Mexico near Eagle Pass. He had documentation for 3 more animal shipments scheduled this month. They're dismantling his entire operation. This news drew Mike's full attention. That's good. Very good. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been troubling him since Storm's abduction. Any word on who gave them information about Thunder and Storm? Someone had to tell them about the rescue center, about the security system. Eleanor's weathered face tightened. Nothing concrete, but the sheriff mentioned one of Vickers' men was talking, trying to get a reduced sentence. Said Vickers had someone on the inside who kept him informed about valuable animals in the area. The implication hung unspoken between them. Someone connected to the rescue center or the conservation area had been feeding information to the smugglers. The betrayal stung, especially given how close they'd come to losing Storm permanently. "We'll figure it out," Mike said finally. "In the meantime, we've upgraded security. No one gets near those two without proper clearance and escort." The sound of a vehicle struggling up the muddy access road interrupted their conversation. Through the rain-streaked window, Mike could make out James Wilson's mud-splattered truck making slow but determined progress toward the center. "Didn't expect to see him back so soon," Eleanor remarked, her tone carefully neutral. The relationship between aunt and nephew remained complicated, decades of misunderstanding and hurt not easily erased by recent cooperation. Mike headed to the entrance, arriving just as James made a dash from his truck through the downpour. His left arm was in a sling, evidence of the injury he'd sustained during the confrontation with Vickers' men. "Roads are getting worse," James reported, shaking rain from his hat. "Another hour and even 4-wheel drive won't get through." Mike nodded. "Appreciate you making the effort. How's the arm?" "Just a graze. Doctors being overcautious." James glanced toward the treatment area. "How are they doing?" "Storm's recovering well. Should be back to full strength in another few days, according to Dr. Morgan." James seemed to hesitate, uncharacteristic uncertainty crossing his features. "Mind if I see them?" Mike led the way to the treatment area, where Sarah was completing her morning examination of Storm. The veterinarian looked up as they entered, offering a tired smile. The past days had been demanding, with Storm requiring around-the-clock monitoring initially. "Perfect timing," she said, packing away her stethoscope. "I was just telling these two they might be ready for a bigger space soon. Storm's vitals are all normal, and the mild dehydration has resolved completely." James approached the enclosure cautiously, stopping a respectful distance from the cattle. Thunder watched him warily, positioning himself slightly in front of Storm in what had become his characteristic protective stance. "They remember everything, don't they?" James asked quietly. "Every kindness, every cruelty?" Sarah nodded. "Their memory and recognition abilities are far more sophisticated than most people realize. They certainly remember you." The observation wasn't particularly reassuring given James's history with the Wilson Ranch cattle. He'd been fired for his harsh treatment methods, a point of contention that had fractured the family years ago. "I wasn't James began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. I wasn't always good to them. To any of the animals. I believed what my father taught me, that livestock need a firm hand, that sentimentality has no place in ranching. His voice roughened. Seeing them now, what they've done for each other, makes a man question some things. Eleanor had entered silently behind them, catching her nephew's confession. For a moment she said nothing, her expression unreadable. Then she moved to stand beside him. We all have things to question, James. Things we accepted without thinking. She gazed at Thunder and Storm with something like reverence. These two have been teaching us all, if we're wise enough to learn. The moment of potential reconciliation was interrupted by a sharp crackling from the center's ancient electrical system. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized as thunder rumbled overhead. "Generators ready if we lose power," Sarah assured them. "We won't have a repeat of last time." The reminder of the previous power outage brought tension back to Thunder's massive frame. The bull's head came up sharply, ears swiveling toward the sound of thunder outside. Storm, sensing his unease, moved closer to him, their bodies touching in silent communication. "He associates thunderstorms with stress now," Sarah observed, "after what happened during his recovery and then during Storm's rescue. It's a conditioned response." Mike watched as Storm gently pressed her head against Thunder's shoulder, making soft sounds that seemed distinctly comforting. Gradually, the tension in the bull's powerful body eased, his focus returning to his companion rather than the threatening sounds outside. "She's calming him," James said, wonder evident in his voice. "Deliberately." Sarah nodded. "They've developed sophisticated communication patterns. Storm seems particularly attuned to Thunder's emotional states and vice versa. It's one of the reasons I've been advocating for keeping them together permanently, regardless of where they end up." The future of Thunder and Storm had become a topic of increasing discussion as their recovery progressed. The conservation area could potentially support them, but concerns remained about their ability to thrive in a semi-wild environment after years of domestication. Several sanctuaries had offered permanent homes, impressed by their story and the media attention it had garnered. "They belong together," Eleanor said firmly. "That much is certain." The power flickered again, and this time did not recover. The treatment area was plunged into dimness, illuminated only by the gray light filtering through the windows. The backup generator hummed to life seconds later, restoring emergency lighting but not the full electrical system. "Main line must be down," Mike surmised, reaching for his flashlight. "I'll check the breaker box, but we're probably in for a long outage with this storm." As he moved toward the door, a sudden noise from outside caught everyone's attention, the distinctive sound of a vehicle engine struggling against the mud. "Expecting anyone else?" James asked, instantly alert. Mike shook his head, hand moving instinctively to where his service weapon would normally be, though he'd left it locked in his office. "No one should be able to get through on those roads now." Eleanor moved to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. "Can't make out much. Dark-colored SUV, I think." Mike's instincts, honed by years as a ranger, sensed trouble. "Sarah, stay with Thunder and Storm. Eleanor, James, come with me. Let's see who our visitor is." They moved cautiously to the main entrance, Mike grabbing his service weapon from the office on the way. Through the front windows they could now see the vehicle more clearly, a black SUV with mud obscuring the license plate, parked haphazardly near the center's entrance. "No markings," James observed. "Not law enforcement or park service." The driver's door opened, and a figure emerged, hunched against the driving rain. Male, middle-aged, dressed expensively despite the weather. Something about him struck Mike as vaguely familiar, though he couldn't immediately place the man. "Stay here," he instructed the others, moving toward the door. Before he could reach it, the door swung open, and the man stepped inside, bringing the smell of rain and expensive cologne with him. He straightened, removing a dripping hat to reveal a face that caused Eleanor to gasp audibly. "Charles," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the drumming rain. Charles Wilson, Eleanor's son and the former owner of Thunder and Storm, stood before them, looking remarkably unchanged from when he'd abandoned his ranch 5 years earlier. Perhaps a few more lines around his eyes, a touch more gray at his temples, but still carrying himself with the same confidence that had always bordered on arrogance. "Mother," he acknowledged with a slight nod before turning to the others. "James, Ranger Foster." The tension in the room was palpable, years of abandonment and betrayal hanging between them. It was Eleanor who broke the silence, her initial shock hardening into something colder. 5 years, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion clearly simmering beneath. 5 years without a word, Charles, not a call, not a letter. And now you appear out of nowhere in the middle of a storm? Charles had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I saw the news coverage about the bull and cow." "My bull and cow, technically." Mike stepped forward, positioning himself subtly between Charles and the direction of the treatment area. "Thunder and Storm aren't yours anymore, Mr. Wilson. You abandoned them when you walked away from the ranch." "Legalities aside," Charles replied smoothly, "I'm here because I realize those animals are quite valuable now. Their story has generated significant media attention, which translates to financial opportunity." The naked calculation in his voice raised Mike's hackles. "They're not for sale or exploitation. They're living beings who have been through trauma and are now recovering in a safe environment." Charles's expression hardened slightly. "I understand the sentimental attachment you've all developed, but let's be realistic. Those cattle represent a significant investment of my family's resources. Their breeding lines alone—" "Your family's resources?" Eleanor interrupted, her voice sharp. "The family you abandoned along with the animals? The legacy you threw away when things got difficult?" A flicker of something, perhaps shame, perhaps merely annoyance, crossed Charles's face. "Mother, business failures happen. The drought, the bank's pressure. I had to make difficult decisions." "You made the easiest decision," James cut in, speaking for the first time since Charles's arrival. "You ran, left everything and everyone behind to deal with your mess." Charles turned to his cousin with barely disguised contempt. "Rich coming from you, James. As I recall, you weren't exactly stepping up to save the ranch either." "Because you fired me," James shot back. "And because I was busy trying to keep my daughter alive while you were making deals with smugglers that eventually destroyed everything our family built?" The accusation hung in the air, raw and damning. Charles's expression flickered between anger and something more defensive. "That's ancient history now. I'm here to discuss the present situation." "Which is what exactly?" Mike asked, his tone deliberately calm despite his growing dislike for the man. "What do you want, Mr. Wilson?" Charles straightened his already perfect posture. "I want what's rightfully mine. Those cattle. Their story has value, and I intend to capitalize on it." Eleanor stepped forward, her frail frame somehow imposing in her righteous anger. "You have no right, legal, moral, or otherwise, to those animals. You forfeited any claim when you left them to die." "They didn't die, though, did they?" Charles countered. "They survived, and now they're famous, worth far more alive than they ever were as simple breeding stock." He turned to Mike. "I'm prepared to make this official. I have lawyers ready to file the necessary paperwork claiming ownership." Mike felt cold anger spreading through him. "On what grounds?" "They were never legally transferred or sold. The bank took the land, but the cattle themselves—" Charles shrugged. "A legal gray area at best, one I'm prepared to exploit if necessary." The naked calculation, the complete absence of any concern for the animal's welfare, confirmed everything Mike had heard about Charles Wilson. Here was a man who saw living beings as nothing more than assets to be leveraged, valued only for what they could provide him. "I think you should leave," Mike said quietly. "Before you say something you'll regret." Charles smiled thinly. "Threats, Ranger Foster? Not very professional." "Not a threat. A suggestion." Mike moved toward the door, making his preference clear. "The roads will be impassable soon. You wouldn't want to get stranded here." For a moment, it seemed Charles might argue further, but a particularly violent crack of thunder seemed to decide him. "This conversation isn't over. I'll be back with my attorneys once the weather clears." He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at Eleanor. "They're just cattle, Mother, animals. Don't let sentimentality cloud your judgment about what they're really worth." Eleanor's response was quiet but cutting. "I know exactly what they're worth, Charles. That's why I'll never let you near them again." As Charles stepped back into the downpour, James moved to the window, watching his cousin's departure with a troubled expression. "He'll be back, and he'll cause problems." Mike nodded grimly. "We'll be ready. In the meantime, I think we need to accelerate our plans for thunder and storm. The sooner they're settled in a permanent situation, the harder it will be for anyone to disrupt it." The sound of rapid footsteps interrupted their planning. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and excitement. "You all need to come see this." "Now." They followed her quickly to the treatment area where an extraordinary scene awaited them. Storm, who had been steadily improving but still showing signs of weakness, was now standing fully alert, her posture strong and purposeful. More remarkably, she appeared to be deliberately demonstrating her recovery to Thunder, walking in a small circle with confident steps, then returning to touch noses with him as if to communicate her progress. "She started this right after the power went out," Sarah explained, her voice hushed with wonder. "It's like she's showing him she's okay, that she's getting better." And look at his response. Thunder was watching Storm's movements with intense focus, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed encouragingly. When she completed her demonstration and returned to him, he gently touched his massive head to hers in what could only be described as a gesture of approval. "I've never seen anything like it," Sarah continued. "It's deliberate communication at a level that challenges everything we think we know about cattle cognition." Eleanor moved closer to the enclosure, tears glistening in her eyes. "They know," she said simply. "They know Charles was here. Somehow, they know there's a new threat." Mike wasn't sure he was ready to attribute that level of awareness to the animals, but there was undeniably something different in their behavior, an urgency, a purposefulness that hadn't been present before. "Whatever they know or don't know," he said quietly, "our responsibility is clear. We protect them, keep them together, and make sure they have a future worthy of what they've shown us." James had been watching the cattle with an unreadable expression. Now he turned to the others, decision evident in his posture. "I have an idea about where they could go. Somewhere Charles wouldn't be able to reach them." All eyes turned to him, questioning. "My property," he continued. "It's small, but it's paid for. No bank can claim it, no lawyers can argue ownership. I could set aside 20 acres just for them, good grazing land with natural water sources." Eleanor looked at her nephew with surprise. "James, that's most of your viable pasture. Your livelihood would be different, not gone," he interrupted. "The media attention has value, like Charles said, but not the way he wants to use it." James's expression hardened with determination. "We could establish a small sanctuary, not just for thunder and storm, but for other animals with nowhere to go. Use their story to fund something worthwhile." The suggestion hung in the air, unexpected and transformative. Mike studied James carefully, looking for signs of the harsh, uncompromising man he'd known for years. Instead, he saw someone changed, humbled perhaps by what he'd witnessed between these remarkable animals. "It's a generous offer," Mike said carefully. "But are you sure? This would be a significant change to your operation, your life." James nodded, his decision clearly already made. "Lily loves those two. Been talking about nothing else since they've been in the news. She's always had a way with animals that I never understood." A shadow crossed his face. "Maybe if I'd listened to her years ago, things would have turned out differently for all of us." Eleanor reached out hesitantly, placing a weathered hand on her nephew's arm. It was the first gesture of affection Mike had ever seen between them. "It's never too late to listen, James. To learn." The moment was interrupted by another flicker of the emergency lights, followed by Sarah's concerned voice. "The generator shouldn't be struggling this much. It's rated for 12 hours at minimum." Mike moved quickly to the window, peering out into the storm. What he saw sent a chill through him. A figure moving furtively near the center's power supply, barely visible through the sheeting rain. "Someone's tampering with the generator," he reported, reaching for his weapon. "James, with me. Sarah, Eleanor, stay with Thunder and Storm." The two men moved swiftly through the building and out a side entrance, using the coverage of the equipment shed to approach the generator area undetected. The rain hammered down, reducing visibility to mere yards, but they could make out a figure crouched beside the generator housing, hands working at something unseen. "Texas Parks and Wildlife," Mike called sharply, his weapon raised. "Step away from the generator." The figure spun, revealing not Charles, as Mike had half expected, but a younger man, one of the center's part-time volunteers, Tim Reeves. His hands were raised, his expression a mixture of fear and defiance. "What are you doing, Tim?" Mike demanded, approaching cautiously. "Following orders," the young man replied, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Making sure the power stays out long enough." James moved to check the generator, finding several wires disconnected. "Long enough for what?" he demanded. Tim's eyes darted between them, calculating. "Long enough for the other guys to get in from the back. The security system's down without full power. They're coming for the cattle." Mike's blood ran cold. Charles hadn't left at all. He'd merely provided a distraction while positioning others to take Thunder and Storm during the confusion of the power outage. "How many?" he asked sharply. "Two more besides Mr. Wilson," Tim replied, seeming to realize cooperation was his best option now. "They're coming in through the storage area, back entrance." Mike made a quick decision. "James, can you reconnect the generator?" James nodded. "Basic wiring, won't take long." "Do it. Then secure this one and join me inside." "We need to protect those animals." Mike raced back toward the main building, rain plastering his clothes to his skin as he ran. He burst through the side entrance, nearly colliding with Sarah in the hallway. "Two men are trying to take Thunder and Storm," he explained quickly. "Charles Wilson's men." "Where are they now?" "Still in the treatment area with Eleanor," Sarah replied, eyes widening. "But the back door was rattling a minute ago. I thought it was the wind." They rushed toward the treatment area, arriving just as the back door crashed open. Two men entered. One Mike recognized as Charles's former ranch foreman, Davis. The other unfamiliar but clearly hired muscle. Both froze momentarily at the sight of Mike's drawn weapon. "This doesn't have to get complicated, Foster," Davis said, his voice steady despite the situation. "Mr. Wilson just wants what's his. We've got paperwork, transport ready." "No one needs to get hurt." Eleanor stood protectively in front of the cattle enclosure, her frail frame somehow imposing in her determination. "These animals aren't going anywhere with you." Davis's expression hardened. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this isn't your decision. Your son has no claim here," Mike interrupted firmly. and attempting to take these animals by force constitutes theft and breaking and entering at minimum. Put your hands where I can see them and back toward the door." For a tense moment, it seemed the men might comply. Then the second man made a sudden movement, reaching into his jacket. Mike adjusted his aim, finger tightening on the trigger, when an unexpected sound froze everyone in place. Thunder, sensing the threat to himself and Storm, let out a bellow of such power and rage that it seemed to vibrate the very air in the room. The massive bull charged the enclosure fence with shocking force, the metal groaning under the impact. The distraction was momentary, but enough. Davis used the opportunity to lunge toward Eleanor, clearly intending to move her forcibly away from the enclosure. What he hadn't counted on was Sarah, who intercepted him with surprising strength, shoving him off balance. "Don't touch her!" the veterinarian shouted, positioning herself protectively beside the elderly woman. The second man had recovered from his surprise and was moving again, this time producing not a weapon, but a cattle prod, a cruel choice given the circumstances. Mike aimed a warning shot above the man's head, the report deafeningly loud in the confined space. "Next one won't miss," he warned. Outside, the sound of the generator roaring back to life signaled James's success. Moments later, the full lights blazed on, and James himself appeared in the doorway behind the intruders, a shotgun leveled at their backs. "Might want to reconsider your options, boys," he drawled, his voice deceptively casual. Caught between armed opponents, Davis and his companion slowly raised their hands. "Charles isn't going to let this go," Davis warned. "Those animals are worth a fortune now. He'll find a way to get them." "Let him try," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the fear she must have felt. "He'll find we're more prepared than he thinks." As James secured the intruders with zip ties provided by Mike, Sarah and Eleanor checked on Thunder and Storm. The massive bull had ceased his assault on the fence but remained agitated, positioning himself protectively in front of Storm, who was showing signs of distress from the confrontation. "They're okay," Sarah reported after a brief examination. "Stressed, but not injured." Eleanor stroked Storm's face through the enclosure bars, murmuring soothing words. "It's all right, beautiful girl. No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go." The local sheriff's department arrived an hour later, navigating the treacherous roads with difficulty to take the would-be thieves into custody. Charles Wilson himself was nowhere to be found, having apparently fled when his plan went awry. The sheriff promised to issue a warrant for his arrest on charges of conspiracy and attempted theft. As the law enforcement vehicles departed, leaving the rescue center in relative peace once more, Mike found himself standing with the others in the treatment area, watching Thunder and Storm gradually relax from their state of high alert. "We need to move forward with James's plan," he said quietly. "The sooner the better. Charles won't stop, and there might be legal complications if he files ownership claims." James nodded, his expression resolute. "I'll start preparations tomorrow. The north pasture is perfect. Natural spring, good grazing, trees for shade. We can have it ready within a week." Eleanor looked at her nephew with new appreciation. "You're sure about this, James? It's a big commitment." "I'm sure," he replied simply. "Lily's coming home next week. She'll want to help." A small smile softened his usually stern features. "She says she's going to study veterinary medicine now. Because of them." He nodded toward Thunder and Storm. Sarah's expression brightened at this. "She'd be excellent. She always had a natural way with the animals when she visited the center." As the conversation turned to practical matters of fencing and shelter construction, Mike found himself observing Thunder and Storm with renewed wonder. The massive bull had calmed completely, once again the gentle giant who watched over his companion with unwavering attention. Storm had settled beside him, their bodies touching in that now familiar way that seemed to communicate more than mere proximity. These animals, through their remarkable bond and the courage they demonstrated, had not only saved each other repeatedly, but had transformed the humans around them. Eleanor had found purpose and renewal. James had discovered a path to redemption. Sarah had expanded her scientific understanding to embrace emotional connections she'd previously dismissed. And Mike himself had gained a deeper appreciation for the complex emotional lives of the creatures under his protection. In the face of danger, greed, and exploitation, Thunder and Storm had demonstrated something profound: that the capacity for love, for sacrifice, for protection of another wasn't uniquely human after all. It existed wherever beings formed true connections, even in a weathered barn in South Texas, between two abandoned Brahmin cattle who had nothing left in the world but each other. And as the storm gradually subsided outside, leaving a washed, clean world in its wake, Mike found himself believing that perhaps that was enough. Sometimes, having one being who truly sees you, who stands beside you through every danger, who offers comfort in darkness and joy in light, sometimes that was everything. Spring arrived in South Texas with a gentle persistence, transforming the winter-brown landscape into a tapestry of wildflowers and fresh green growth. 3 months had passed since the dramatic confrontation at the rescue center, months filled with change, challenges, and unexpected blessings. James Wilson stood at the fence line of what locals had taken to calling Thunder's pasture, watching the two Brahmin cattle graze peacefully among the bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush that dotted the 20 acres he'd set aside for them. The sanctuary had come together more quickly than anyone anticipated, fueled by community support, media attention, and the surprising generosity of people touched by Thunder and Storm's story. "They look happy," Lily observed, joining her father at the fence. At 15, James's daughter had grown taller during her latest remission, her once frail frame filling out with the healthy glow of recovery. The sanctuary project had given her purpose during difficult days of treatment, and now she spent every free moment helping with the animals. James nodded, allowing himself a rare smile. "They've earned it." The transformation of the Wilson property had been remarkable. What had once been a struggling cattle operation barely keeping afloat was now Second Chance Ranch, a small but growing sanctuary for abandoned and rescued livestock. The north pasture belonged exclusively to Thunder and Storm, but 3 other enclosures had been developed for additional animals, mostly former farm animals rescued from neglect or slaughter. The centerpiece was a modern barn with attached veterinary facilities, funded largely through donations that had poured in after the national media coverage of Thunder and Storm's story. Dr. Sarah Morgan split her time between the rescue center and the sanctuary, bringing her expertise and growing appreciation for animal cognition to both operations. "Dad," Lily said hesitantly, interrupting James's thoughts, "there's a car coming up the drive. Looks like Ranger Foster and Eleanor." James turned to see Mike's familiar truck approaching, Eleanor Wilson seated in the passenger side. Their visits had become regular occurrences, though usually they called ahead. The unannounced arrival sent a flicker of concern through him. "Go tell your mother we have company," he instructed Lily, moving to meet the approaching vehicle. Mike parked near the new barn, coming around quickly to help Eleanor from the passenger seat. The elderly woman moved more slowly these days, her health gradually declining despite her fierce determination to remain involved with the animals she loved. Today, however, her eyes held a spark James hadn't seen in months. "We have news," she announced without preamble as James approached. "The judge ruled this morning on Charles's claim." James felt his chest tighten. Charles Wilson had indeed filed legal paperwork attempting to establish ownership of Thunder and Storm, initiating a court battle that had dragged on for months, despite his outstanding warrant for the attempted theft. His lawyers had argued that the cattle represented significant financial investment and breeding potential that rightfully belonged to their client. "And?" James prompted when Eleanor paused dramatically. Mike's face broke into a rare, full smile. Dismissed with prejudice. The judge ruled that abandonment was clearly established when Charles left the ranch, and that the subsequent care provided by the rescue center and now the sanctuary constitutes a transfer of ethical, if not strictly legal, ownership. Relief flooded through James, loosening the knot of anxiety he'd carried since the legal challenge began. So it's over? They're safe? More than that, Eleanor continued, her voice strengthening with satisfaction. The judge specifically noted the extraordinary bond between the animals as relevant to his decision, stating that separating them or subjecting them to commercial exploitation would constitute a form of cruelty inconsistent with Texas livestock welfare statutes. He cited their relationship as legally significant? James asked, incredulous. Mike nodded. First time I've ever seen anything like it. The judge basically recognized their connection as something worthy of legal protection. Creates an interesting precedent. The implications were profound, extending beyond thunder and storm to potentially impact how the law viewed animal relationships and emotional bonds. It was a small step, perhaps, but a significant one toward recognizing the complex inner lives of creatures humans had too often dismissed as mere property. "What about Charles?" James asked, his mind turning to his cousin's potential reaction. "Is he still facing charges?" Mike's expression sobered. "That's the other news. Police in Arizona picked him up yesterday trying to arrange another exotic animal shipment. Multiple felony charges, interstate trafficking. He won't be challenging custody of any animals for a very long time." A complex mixture of emotions washed through James. Relief that the threat was neutralized, sadness for his family's continued disgrace, and a quiet vindication that justice had finally caught up with his cousin's exploitative practices. "Does this mean we can move forward with the educational program?" Lily asked, having returned in time to hear the news. The teenager had been instrumental in developing plans for school visits to the sanctuary, using Thunder and Storm's story to teach children about animal intelligence and emotional lives. "Absolutely," Mike confirmed. In fact, the ruling specifically mentioned the educational value of maintaining the animals in their current situation. The judge was quite impressed with the sanctuary's mission. Eleanor's weathered face creased with satisfaction. Charles never understood what he had in those two, never saw them as anything but commodities. She shook her head slowly. His loss, our gain. The conversation moved to practical matters as they walked toward the barn. Upcoming sanctuary events, the educational program Lily was developing, plans for expanding the facilities to accommodate more rescued animals. The success of Second Chance Ranch had exceeded everyone's expectations, drawing support from unlikely corners of the community. "The Cattlemen's Association called yesterday," James mentioned as they approached the barn. "They want to feature the sanctuary in their quarterly magazine. Seems Thunder and Storm have changed some minds about livestock welfare." "Not just them," Mike observed, gesturing toward the main pasture where Thunder and Storm grazed peacefully. "You've done something remarkable here, James. Changed the narrative about what's possible, about how we can relate to these animals." The compliment caught James off guard, uncomfortable praise from a man who had once despised him for his treatment of animals. The irony wasn't lost on him that he, once fired for harsh handling practices, now ran a sanctuary dedicated to compassionate care. "I had good teachers," he replied simply, nodding toward Thunder and Storm. Inside the newly constructed barn, Sarah Morgan was reviewing medical charts for the sanctuary's newest arrivals. 3 abandoned dairy calves rescued from a bankrupt farm. She looked up as the group entered, immediately reading their expressions. "Good news about the court case?" she guessed. Mike filled her in on the details as she finished her work. Sarah had become an integral part of the sanctuary's operations, her scientific background lending credibility to their observations about animal behavior and cognition. She'd begun documenting Thunder and Storm's interactions systematically, gathering data for what promised to be a groundbreaking paper on bovine emotional intelligence. That ruling could have significant implications for animal welfare law, she noted when Mike finished explaining. Recognizing emotional bonds between animals as legally significant, that's unprecedented in livestock cases. Eleanor lowered herself carefully onto a nearby bench, fatigue evident in her movements despite her obvious satisfaction with the news. "I only wish Mary could have seen this," she said quietly, referring to Mike's mother. "She always understood what most of us took too long to learn." Mike nodded, a familiar shadow of grief crossing his features at the mention of his mother. "She'd have loved this place, especially seeing how Thunder and Storm have thrived here." Through the barn's large windows they could see the two Brahman cattle moving in their characteristic synchrony across the pasture. The bond between them had only strengthened during their time at the sanctuary, evolving in ways that continued to surprise even those who knew them best. Thunder, fully recovered from his injuries, had regained his impressive stature and strength. Yet the massive bull displayed a gentleness that defied conventional understanding of his breed, particularly in his interactions with Storm, and increasingly with the humans who cared for them. He would lower his massive head for Lily to stroke, stand patiently during examinations, and seem to understand verbal commands with uncanny precision. Storm had blossomed in the sanctuary environment, her initial protectiveness of Thunder evolving into a more balanced partnership. She often led their explorations of the pasture, displaying curiosity about new additions to their environment, while Thunder followed watchfully. Their communication remained a source of wonder, subtle movements, vocalizations, and body language that conveyed complex information between them. "I've been documenting some remarkable behaviors," Sarah shared as they observed the cattle. "They've developed what appears to be a rudimentary form of tool use. Thunder using his horns to lower high branches so Storm can reach the leaves. And their alarm system is sophisticated, different vocalizations for different types of perceived threats." Lily's face lit up with enthusiasm. "They've been teaching the other cattle, too. The dairy calves were completely disoriented when they arrived, but Storm kept approaching them, showing them where the best grazing spots are. It's like she's mentoring them." The observation sparked a thoughtful discussion about the potential for animal culture, behaviors and knowledge transmitted not through genetics but through observation and learning. The sanctuary was providing unique opportunities to observe such phenomena, challenging long-held assumptions about livestock cognition. As the afternoon progressed, the group moved outside to the observation deck James had constructed overlooking Thunder and Storm's pasture. The elevated platform allowed visitors to observe the cattle without disturbing them, while providing comfortable seating for educational presentations. Eleanor settled into one of the cushioned chairs, her gaze fixed on the animals she'd known since birth. Despite her failing health, her mind remained sharp, her observations about Thunder and Storm's behavior often more insightful than those of the professionals studying them. "They know we're watching," she remarked as Thunder raised his head to look directly at the observation deck. "Always aware of their surroundings, those two." As if in confirmation, Thunder began moving deliberately toward them, Storm following a few paces behind. It was feeding time, but something about their approach seemed purposeful beyond mere anticipation of food. "They've got something to show us," Lily said confidently, familiar with the cattle's patterns. "That's their come-see walk." The group descended from the deck, moving to the fence line as Thunder and Storm approached. The massive bull stopped a respectful distance away, waiting as Storm moved beside him. Then, with deliberate care, Storm extended her neck over the fence toward Eleanor. The elderly woman reached out a weathered hand, stroking Storm's face with gentle familiarity. "Hello, beautiful girl," she murmured. "What's on your mind today?" For several moments the cow remained still, accepting Eleanor's touch with evident pleasure. Then she stepped back, turning to look at Thunder as if in silent communication. The bull moved forward, lowering his massive head to Eleanor's level, a gesture of trust that still amazed those who understood the potential danger of such a powerful animal. "They sense it," Sarah said quietly to Mike. "Eleanor's condition. They know something's changing." Mike nodded, having observed similar awareness in wild animals approaching the end of their lives. There was something in the cattle's demeanor, a gentleness, an attentiveness toward Eleanor that transcended routine interaction. "They've always known more than we gave them credit for," he replied. Eleanor spent nearly an hour with Thunder and Storm, talking to them softly about matters she shared with no one else. The others maintained a respectful distance, recognizing the private communion between the elderly woman and the animals she'd helped save. When she finally rejoined the group, there was a serenity in her expression that hadn't been present before. "They understand," she said simply, "more than you might think." As sunset approached, casting long golden light across the sanctuary, plans were made for the following week's activities: a school group visit, scheduled veterinary checks, and the monthly open house that had become a popular community event. Life at Second Chance Ranch had developed its own rhythm, centered around the care of its animal residents, but extending to education and advocacy work that reached far beyond its fences. "We should get going," Mike said eventually, noting Eleanor's increasing fatigue. "It's been a long day." James walked them to the truck, helping Eleanor into the passenger seat with careful attention to her comfort. Before closing her door, she reached out to grasp his hand. "You've done something wonderful here, James," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years and understanding. "Something that matters. I'm proud of you." The simple words, from a woman who had once viewed him with disappointment and distrust, struck James deeply. He squeezed her hand gently, unable to find adequate response to the reconciliation her statement represented. As Mike's truck pulled away, James returned to the pasture fence where Lily stood watching Thunder and Storm in the fading light. The cattle had moved to their favorite resting spot beneath a large live oak, settling side by side in their characteristic pose. Bodies touching, heads occasionally brushing together in quiet communication. "They changed everything, didn't they?" Lily observed, leaning against her father's arm. "Not just for themselves, but for all of us." James nodded, watching as Thunder shifted slightly to allow Storm more comfortable access to a patch of particularly lush grass. The simple consideration, the awareness of another's needs, represented everything he'd come to understand through observing these remarkable animals. "They showed us what was possible," he replied. "What was always there, if we'd had eyes to see it." The sanctuary fell quiet as evening descended, staff and volunteers departing until only James and Lily remained, sharing comfortable silence as they watched over the animals that had transformed their lives. In the distance, Thunder and Storm rested peacefully beneath their tree, silhouettes merging into one shape against the deepening twilight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to expand the work they'd begun. The court victory ensured Thunder and Storm's safety, but there were countless other animals needing rescue, needing someone to recognize their worth beyond commercial value. The sanctuary was growing, its mission expanding beyond what any of them had initially imagined. Yet in this moment of quiet reflection, James found himself focused not on future plans, but on the simple truth before him. Two beings who had found in each other something profound enough to survive abandonment, predators, abduction, and exploitation, who had demonstrated through action rather than words that loyalty, compassion, and love weren't uniquely human traits but existed wherever beings formed true connections. "Dad?" Lily's voice broke gently into his thoughts. "Do you think they know how much they've changed things? How important they are?" James considered the question, watching as Thunder raised his head briefly in the gathering darkness, checking their surroundings one last time before settling more deeply against Storm's side for the night. "I think," he said carefully, "they know what matters most, that they have each other, that they're safe, that they're home." He placed an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Sometimes that's everything." Lily nodded, satisfied with the answer. Together, father and daughter turned toward their own home, leaving Thunder and Storm to the peaceful night beneath a canopy of emerging stars. Behind them, the sanctuary stood as testament to what these remarkable animals had taught them all, that the capacity for connection, for protection, for devotion wasn't defined by species or intelligence as humans measured it, but by something more fundamental and profound. And that sometimes the most important lessons come not from those who can speak, but from those who communicate in other ways, through loyalty that never wavers, through courage in the face of danger, through a bond so powerful it changes everyone fortunate enough to witness it. As the Texas night settled fully over Second Chance Ranch, Thunder and Storm slept peacefully side by side, their story still unfolding, their legacy already secure in the lives they'd transformed and the hearts they'd opened. Not just cattle, not just survivors, but teachers whose silent wisdom had revealed a simple truth too long overlooked, that love, in its purest form, needs no words to change the world. In the remarkable story of Thunder and Storm, we find a powerful reminder that true connection transcends all boundaries, even species. These two Brahman cattle showed us that devotion, loyalty, and love aren't uniquely human traits, but exist wherever hearts truly bond. For those of us in our golden years who've weathered life's storms, their journey resonates deeply. Like Eleanor, who found renewed purpose in her twilight years, through these magnificent animals, we too can discover new meaning when we open ourselves to unexpected connections. Thunder and Storm remind us it's never too late to heal old wounds, as James discovered when reconciling with his family. They show us that sometimes our greatest legacy isn't what we build or achieve, but the relationships we nurture and the compassion we extend. In a world that often dismisses the wisdom of aging, these extraordinary animals demonstrate that the most profound insights can come from simply being present for those we love. What unexpected relationship has brought you joy in your later years? Has an animal ever taught you something profound about life or love? Please share your stories in the comments. Your wisdom and experience are treasures this community values deeply.